9 women walked through those ranch gates. 9 women fled before winter's first snow, swearing they'd seen something in Gideon Blackridge's eyes that no amount of money or land could fix. The 10th woman? She didn't just stay. She refused to leave even when he begged her to go. This is the story of the mountain that breaks everyone, the rancher everyone called broken, and the woman who proved them all wrong. If you're watching from your city tonight, drop a comment and let me see how far this story travels. Hit that like button, settle in, because what happened on that frozen mountain changed everything anyone thought they knew about survival, loneliness, and what it really takes to thaw a frozen heart. The stagecoach rattled into Grover's Bluff on a Tuesday that felt like the world had forgotten how to be warm. Evelyn Mercer pressed her gloved hand against the frost-crusted window, watching the town materialize through sheets of November sleet. The buildings looked tired, gray wood weathered by mountain winds, windows dark even in midday. Smoke rose from scattered chimneys in thin, desperate columns. This wasn't a town that thrived. This was a town that survived, barely, clinging to the edge of wilderness like a man hanging from a cliff. The stagecoach driver, a weathered man named Clem, who'd spoken maybe 20 words during the 3-day journey, finally broke his silence. "You sure about this, miss?" Evelyn didn't look at him. "I'm sure. Because once I leave you here, next stage won't come through for 2 weeks. Weather turns bad. Could be longer." "I understand." Clem shifted in his seat, leather creaking. "It ain't my business, but you know about the Black Ridge Ranch, don't you? About him? I know what I need to know." "Do you, though?" Clem's voice carried something that might have been concern or might have been the exhaustion of having this same conversation too many times. 9 women, miss. 9. All came up here with the same idea you got. All left before Christmas. Some didn't even make it a month. Evelyn finally turned to face him. Her eyes were gray, the color of winter sky, and they held something Clem couldn't quite identify. Not hope. She seemed too practical for that. Not fear either. Something harder. Something that looked like decision made final. "Then I suppose I'll be the 10th, she said. The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of a building that proclaimed itself the Grover's Bluff General Store and Post Office in faded letters. Before Clem could protest further, Evelyn gathered her carpetbag and stepped down into the mud and slush. The cold hit her like a fist. Back in Philadelphia, winter meant parties, fur-lined coats, warm parlors with fires tended by servants. Here, winter meant survival. She could feel it in the air, that particular bite that promised snow, isolation, the kind of cold that got inside your bones and nested there. The post office door opened, spilling yellow lamplight across the street. A man emerged, broad-shouldered and balding, wearing an expression of practiced neutrality that didn't quite hide his curiosity. "You must be Miss Mercer," he said. Not a question. In a town this small, strangers didn't arrive unannounced. "Mrs. Mercer," Evelyn corrected, though the title felt strange on her tongue. Widow for 3 years now, though Philadelphia society had never quite let her forget the scandal of Jonathan's debts, his other women, the mess he'd left behind when his heart gave out in someone else's bed. "Walter Boone. I run the post office." He studied her with the careful assessment of a man used to sizing up trouble before it arrived. "Got the letter here from Blackridge. Says you're expected up at the ranch." "That's correct." Walter pulled an envelope from his coat pocket, holding it like it might burn his fingers. "Before I give you this, I feel obliged to tell you something. This town's seen a lot of hopeful women come through, heading up that mountain. Seen every one of them come back down, too. Usually crying, sometimes angry. Once," he paused, something flickering across his face. "Once, scared enough to take a horse in the middle of the night and not even wait for the morning stage. I appreciate your concern, Mr. Boone." "Do you?" He didn't move to hand over the letter, because Gideon Blackridge isn't like other men. He's cold, Evelyn finished, silent, difficult, possibly cruel. Lives alone on an isolated ranch that winters turn into a prison. Drives away every woman who tries to, what was the phrase he used, civilize the wilderness out of him. "Yes, Mr. Boone, I know. He wrote it all in his letters. Every ugly truth about himself in that ranch." Walter blinked, clearly not expecting that. "And you still came?" Evelyn took the letter from his hand. "I came because he told the truth. Do you know how rare that is? A man who doesn't dress up his flaws in pretty words, who doesn't promise comfort he can't deliver or romance he doesn't feel." She tucked the envelope into her coat. I've had enough of liars disguising themselves as gentlemen. I'll take an honest, hard man over a dishonest, charming one. Behind them, Clem was already unloading her trunk. One modest piece of luggage that held everything she'd decided mattered from her old life. Not much, as it turned out. Walter looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Evelyn's expression stopped him. Instead, he sighed. Ranch is 8 miles north. Road's rough even in good weather, and we're past good weather now. I can have someone drive you up tomorrow morning. Today, Evelyn said. I'll go today. Mrs. Mercer? The sun sets in 3 hours. You won't make it before dark. Then I'll arrive in the dark. That road at night. Mr. Boone? Evelyn's voice didn't rise, but it carried the weight of every argument she'd already had with herself during 3 days of travel, 3 months of correspondence, 3 years of deciding what kind of life she could stomach living. I didn't come this far to spend the night in a boarding house gathering courage. Either arrange transportation or tell me where I can rent a horse. Those are the only 2 options I'm interested in hearing. Walter studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Tommy? He called toward the stable across the street. Hitch up the wagon! We got a delivery for the Black Ridge Ranch! As arrangements were made, Evelyn stood in the street, looking north toward mountains she couldn't see through the low clouds. Somewhere up there, in that white wilderness, waited a man who'd written her 6 letters over 3 months. Letters that never once lied about who he was or what he could offer. The first letter had been brutal. I need a wife for practical reasons. The ranch requires 2 sets of hands, not 1. Winters here kill people who aren't prepared. I can't promise comfort, conversation, or affection. I can promise shelter, food, and honest work. If that sounds like hell disguised as marriage, you understand the situation correctly. Evelyn had written back the same day, not because she was desperate, though Philadelphia's polite society would certainly have used that word. Not because she romanticized frontier life or harbored fantasies about fixing broken men. She wrote back because Gideon Blackridge's harsh honesty felt like water after years of drowning in pretty lies. Her late husband had promised her the world, delivered nothing but debt and humiliation. Gideon promised her nothing. Somehow, that felt safer. The wagon ride up the mountain took 2 hours. Tommy, the stable boy pressed into service as driver, tried to make conversation for the first mile, then gave up when Evelyn's responses remained polite but minimal. The road, and calling it a road required generosity, climbed steadily through dense pine forest, the trees pressing close like walls. Snow began falling an hour into the journey, not the gentle romantic snowfall of Christmas cards, but hard pellets that stung exposed skin and collected quickly on the wagon's floor. Tommy hunched deeper into his coat and urged the horses faster. Should turn back, he muttered, not quite loud enough to be a real suggestion. Weather's turning bad. Evelyn said nothing. She'd stopped being the kind of woman who turned back. The forest eventually opened into a high valley ringed by peaks that vanished into gray-white sky. And there, alone in all that wilderness, stood the Black Ridge Ranch. It wasn't what Evelyn had imagined, though she'd tried not to imagine anything at all. The main house was larger than expected, 2 stories of weathered timber with a steep roof designed to shed heavy snow. A barn stood nearby, solid and well-maintained. Fencing marked pastures where cattle huddled against the wind. Everything looked functional, built for survival rather than beauty, but not neglected. This wasn't the ruin of a man who'd given up. This was the fortress of a man who'd decided to endure. Smoke rose from the house's chimney, a thin gray line against the darkening sky. "Wait here," Tommy said as they pulled into the yard. "I'll fetch him." "No need," Evelyn said, climbing down. Her legs wobbled after 2 hours of jostling, but she steadied herself against the wagon. "I can introduce myself." "Ma'am, that ain't how—" The house door opened. Even expecting him, even prepared for the reality of Gideon Blackridge after 3 months of letters, Evelyn felt something catch in her chest when she saw him. Tall. That was the first word that came to mind. Tall enough that he had to duck slightly under the doorframe. Broad through the shoulders in the way of men who spent their lives doing actual labor, not the artificial breadth of city men who paid trainers to sculpt their bodies. Dark hair falling past his collar, overdue for cutting. A beard that hadn't been trimmed in weeks, maybe months, but it was his eyes that stopped her. Blue. Startlingly blue against weather-beaten skin, and completely, utterly empty of welcome. He looked at her the way someone might look at an unexpected storm, something to be endured, not celebrated. Mrs. Mercer. His voice matched his appearance, rough, unused to conversation, carrying the particular grain of someone who spent more time talking to animals than people. Mr. Blackridge. They stood there in the falling snow, 30 feet apart, taking each other's measure. Tommy cleared his throat. I'll just, unload her trunk. Leave it, Gideon said, not taking his eyes off Evelyn. She might not be staying. Evelyn felt something sharp and cold settle in her stomach, but her voice remained steady. The letters indicated I was expected. Expected don't mean wanted. Gideon stepped out onto the porch, crossing his arms. Even from this distance, Evelyn could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he held himself like a man braced for impact. Last woman who came up here, she took one look at the place and cried for 6 hours straight, didn't even unpack, made Tommy drive her back down that same night. I'm not the last woman who came up here. No, Gideon agreed. You're the latest, just like the 8 before her, all thinking they could manage. All wrong. Mr. Blackridge. Evelyn took 3 steps forward, close enough now to see his face clearly. Younger than she'd expected, maybe 35, though hard living made age difficult to gauge. A scar cut through his left eyebrow. His hands, gripping his own arms, were scarred too, work-worn. Honest hands, at least. I didn't travel 3 days on a stagecoach, leave behind everything I knew, and ride up a mountain in a snowstorm to be talked out of my own decision. Your letters were clear. This place is hard. You're hard. Winter here is brutal. I understood all of that when I wrote back. I understood it when I bought the train ticket. I understood it when I got in that wagon. Nothing you say now is going to be worse than what you already told me. Something flickered in those blue eyes. Surprise, maybe. Or the distant cousin of respect. You don't know what you're agreeing to, he said, but with less certainty than before. Then I'll learn. Or I'll fail. But I'll do it after actually trying, not because you decided to protect me from my own choices. The wind picked up, sending snow swirling between them. Behind Evelyn, Tommy was doing his best to disappear into his coat collar, clearly wishing he was anywhere else. Gideon stared at her for what felt like a full minute. Then finally, he jerked his head toward the house. Get inside before you freeze. Tommy, bring the trunk. It wasn't a warm welcome, but it was permission. Evelyn would take it. The inside of the house was unexpected, clean, painfully clean, with the particular tidiness of someone who used organization as a defense against chaos. A large main room served as kitchen, dining area, and sitting space, dominated by a stone fireplace that currently held a small, efficient fire. Simple furniture, table, chairs, a worn sofa, all positioned with geometric precision. No decorations, no photographs, no evidence that anyone actually lived here rather than just occupied the space. It looked like a house where life had been carefully removed. Bedrooms upstairs, Gideon said, still standing by the door as if ready to bolt back outside. Take the one on the left. Other one's mine. Kitchen's stocked. Fire stays lit all night. Wood's in the box, don't let it get low. Storm's coming in tonight, probably last 3 days. Don't go outside without telling me first. Animals are in the barn. They're my responsibility, not yours. You got questions? Evelyn set down her carpet bag, taking in the space. Several, but they can wait. Good. I got work to finish before dark. Stay inside. He was halfway out the door when Evelyn spoke again. Mr. Blackridge? He paused, not turning around. Thank you for letting me stay. His shoulders tensed. For a moment she thought he might respond. Instead, he stepped out into the snow and pulled the door shut behind him. Through the window, Evelyn watched him cross the yard toward the barn, his figure quickly becoming indistinct in the thickening snowfall. Tommy was already climbing back onto the wagon, clearly eager to get down the mountain before the weather turned worse. Alone now, Evelyn allowed herself a long, slow breath. The house was cold despite the fire. Not temperature cold. The fireplace threw enough heat, but the cold of a place that had forgotten warmth meant more than just degrees. She'd felt it the moment she walked in, that particular emptiness of a home where no one laughed, no one sang, no one did any of the small, pointless things that made a house feel lived in. Her trunk sat by the door containing her entire previous life condensed into one piece of luggage. 3 dresses. Undergarments. Her mother's silver brush. A single photograph of her parents, dead now 10 years. 6 books. Writing paper and ink. Not much to show for 31 years of living. She hauled it upstairs herself, refusing to wait for help that clearly wasn't coming. The bedroom on the left was small but adequate. A bed with a plain quilt, a dresser, a window that looked out over the valley, though right now all she could see was white. Like the downstairs, the room was clean, impersonal, empty of character. Evelyn unpacked methodically, putting her few possessions in the dresser drawers, hanging her dresses on pegs set into the wall. When everything was put away, she sat on the bed, firm mattress, no give, and allowed herself 5 minutes. 5 minutes to acknowledge the fear. 5 minutes to recognize the magnitude of what she'd done. 5 minutes to wonder if she'd made a catastrophic mistake. Then she stood up, smoothed her skirts, and went back downstairs to figure out what came next. The kitchen was well organized, everything labeled and stored with the same geometric precision as the rest of the house. Flour, sugar, coffee, beans, dried meat, canned vegetables. Enough food for months, all carefully inventoried. A man preparing for siege, not life. Evelyn started coffee. The pot was clean, sitting ready on the stove as if waiting for someone to remember its purpose. While it heated, she explored the rest of the main floor. A small room off the kitchen held tools, lanterns, and supplies. A closet contained coats, boots, winter gear all sized for a large man. Nothing decorative, nothing unnecessary, nothing that suggested anyone had ever tried to make this place feel like home. Outside, the storm Gideon had predicted arrived with force. Wind hammered the house, driving snow against the windows in white waves. The temperature dropped fast enough that Evelyn could feel it, that particular cold that found every crack and gap in a building's defenses. She added wood to the fire, then more wood, building it up against the growing chill. Hours passed. The light outside faded from gray to black. Still no sign of Gideon. Evelyn made dinner, beans and salt pork, nothing fancy, the kind of meal designed for fuel rather than pleasure. She set the table for two, then waited. The fire crackled, wind roared, snow piled against the windows. He didn't come. By 9 o'clock, Evelyn ate alone, standing by the stove because the dining table felt too formal, too optimistic. She washed her plate, cup, and fork, put them away, added more wood to the fire. At 10 o'clock, she finally climbed the stairs to her room. Through her window, she could barely make out the barn through the blizzard. A faint glow suggested lamplight inside. He was out there then, in the storm, choosing the company of cattle over coming inside. Evelyn undressed in the dark, put on her nightgown, and slid between cold sheets. Her first night on the Blackridge Ranch, alone in a stranger's house, 8 miles from the nearest town, married to a man who hadn't spoken more than 20 words to her. She didn't cry. She'd stopped being the kind of woman who cried over things she chose. Instead, she lay awake, listening to the wind tear at the house, and wondered what the morning would bring. The storm lasted 3 days, just as Gideon had predicted. During those 3 days, Evelyn saw her husband, because that's what he was now, legally if not practically, a total of 6 times. Each encounter followed the same pattern. He'd come in from the barn, snow-covered and silent, warm himself by the fire for exactly 10 minutes, then disappear back outside. He never spoke unless absolutely necessary, never made eye contact, never acknowledged her presence beyond the bare minimum required by practicality. On the first morning, Evelyn woke to find fresh wood stacked by the fireplace and coffee already made. She never heard him come in, never heard him leave. She spent that day exploring the house more thoroughly, learning its rhythms and systems. The water pump in the kitchen worked but required priming. The pantry was extraordinarily well stocked. Someone had prepared for winters that could cut the ranch off from civilization for months. She found account books in a small desk, meticulously maintained records of every expense, every sale, every transaction. Gideon Blackridge might be silent and cold, but he wasn't careless. On the second day, she started making changes. Small ones at first. She moved the chairs by the fireplace to catch better light, swept the floors even though they were already clean, opened the curtains, thin, practical things that barely deserved the name, to let in what little daylight filtered through the storm. That evening, when Gideon came in for his 10-minute warming, he paused, looked at the rearranged chairs, said nothing, left. But the next morning, the chairs remained where she'd moved them. On the third day, Evelyn baked bread. She hadn't planned to, but the house felt so desperately quiet, so aggressively empty, that she needed to do something, anything, that created life. The smell of baking bread filled the kitchen, warm and yeasty and alive. She was pulling the loaves from the oven when the door opened. Gideon stood in the doorway, covered in snow, staring at her with an expression she couldn't read. "Storm's breaking," he said. His voice sounded rusty, unused. "Tomorrow morning, weather should clear enough for riding. You want to leave? I'll take you down to town." Evelyn set the hot bread on the counter, her hands steady despite the sudden acceleration of her heartbeat. "Do you want me to leave?" "Ain't about what I want." "I think it is, actually." Gideon's jaw tightened. "You don't know me. Don't know this place. Don't know what you agreed to. Then tell me." "Tell you what?" "What I agreed to. What this place is. Who you are." Evelyn pulled off her oven mitts, meeting his eyes directly. "You wrote 6 letters, Mr. Blackridge. Each one told me facts. What you couldn't promise, what the ranch required, what previous women couldn't handle. But you never told me why." "Why what?" "Why you need a wife. Why you're alone up here. Why 9 women left, but you keep trying to find a 10th. She took a step toward him. "Why a man who clearly wants to be left alone keeps writing letters to strangers, asking them to come." Something dangerous flashed in those blue eyes. "Maybe I need the help." "Ranch work. You've been running this ranch alone for years based on those account books. You don't need help. You've survived just fine." "Survived ain't the same as living." The words came out harsh, almost angry, like they'd escaped against his will. Gideon's face closed down immediately, that blank mask slamming back into place. "Storm's breaking," he repeated. "Tomorrow morning. You want to leave? Say so now. Otherwise what? Otherwise you're staying. For real. No more trial period. No more waiting to see if you can handle it. You stay. You're committed. Same as me." Evelyn could feel her pulse in her throat, her palms. This was it. The actual decision. Not the one she'd made in Philadelphia, surrounded by familiar streets and the safety of civilization. Not the one she'd made climbing into that wagon. This one. Here. Now. With full understanding of exactly how alone she'd be, how silent this house was, how clearly her husband did not want her here even as he asked her to stay. "I'll stay," she said. Gideon stared at her like she'd spoken a foreign language. "You don't—" "I'll stay," she repeated, firmer. "Not because I'm desperate. Not because I have nowhere else to go. I'll stay because I choose to." Is that clear enough? For a long moment, he didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there dripping melting snow onto the floor, looking at her with an expression that might have been confusion or might have been something more complicated. Finally, he nodded once. Sharp, definite. "Then we're married," he said. "For real." He turned to leave, but Evelyn's voice stopped him. "Mr. Blackridge? The bread's fresh. You should eat before you go back out." He hesitated. The first genuine hesitation she'd seen from him. For a moment, she thought he might actually refuse. Then, moving like a man approaching something dangerous, he crossed to the table and sat down. Evelyn cut thick slices, still warm enough that butter melted into them, set a plate in front of him, poured coffee. Gideon ate in silence, not looking at her. But he ate slowly, not the quick functional consumption of a man just refueling. He ate like someone remembering that food could be something other than fuel. When he finished, he stood, pulled his coat back on, and headed for the door. "Thank you," he said, so quietly she almost missed it. Then he was gone, back into the dying storm. Evelyn stood alone in the kitchen, surrounded by the warm smell of bread, and allowed herself a small private smile. It wasn't much. It wasn't romance. It wasn't even conversation. But it was something. And something she was learning was more than this house had seen in years. Met. The fourth morning dawned clear and brutally cold. Evelyn woke to the sound of chopping wood. She dressed quickly, simple wool dress, thick stockings, her warmest shawl, and went downstairs to find Gideon already gone, but evidence of his presence everywhere. Fire burning strong, coffee made, fresh wood stacked, and outside the rhythmic thunk-thunk-thunk of an axe hitting timber. She poured coffee, added a scandalous amount of sugar, one of the few luxuries she'd noticed in the well-stocked pantry, and stood by the window watching him work. He'd removed his coat despite the cold, working in shirt sleeves that showed the flex and release of muscle with each swing. Efficient, no wasted motion. The woodpile grew steadily, each split log tossed onto the stack with practiced accuracy. Evelyn had been married before. She understood what desire felt like, how it could cloud judgment and lead to catastrophic decisions. What she felt watching Gideon work wasn't that. It was something more complicated. Recognition, maybe. respect for competence, appreciation for the particular grace of someone doing what they were built to do. He was beautiful the way a well-made tool was beautiful, designed for function, refined by use. When he paused to drink from a water skin, she made a decision. She pulled on her coat, one of her Philadelphia coats, completely inadequate for mountain winter, but all she had, and stepped outside. The cold hit like a wall, stole her breath, made her eyes water. Gideon looked up, frowning. "Get back inside." "I need to learn," Evelyn said, crossing the yard toward him. Her feet sank into snow that came past her ankles, immediately soaking through her thin boots. "Learn what?" "Everything. How things work here, what needs doing. You said this ranch requires 2 sets of hands. I need to know what my hands should be doing." "Your hands should be staying warm." "Mr. Blackridge." "Gideon," he said abruptly. "We're married. Might as well use names." "Gideon." She stopped a few feet away, close enough to see the steam of his breath, the flush of exertion on his face. "I can't help if I don't know what needs helping with. And I didn't come here to sit inside while you do everything." He studied her with that unreadable expression. "You're wearing the wrong boots." "I know." "Wrong coat, too. That thing won't last a week up here." "I know that, too." "Then what exactly—" He stopped, his eyes narrowing. "You planning to go into town?" "Not a question." Evelyn nodded. "Eventually. To buy proper clothes, but that can wait. Right now, I'm asking you to teach me what I need to know." Gideon looked at her Philadelphia coat, her soaked boots, her shivering shoulders despite the brave set of her jaw. Something shifted in his expression, not softening exactly, but a crack in the armor. "Can you ride, Tug?" he asked. "I learned as a girl." "How long ago?" 15 years. "You're going to need to learn again. Different kind of riding out here." He nodded toward the barn. "Got a mare gentle enough. Tomorrow morning I'll start showing you the property. Where the boundaries are, where cattle gather, where the water sources freeze and which stay clear." "Tomorrow?" Evelyn had expected resistance, arguments, more reasons why she should stay inside. Weather won't hold forever. Another storm comes, could be snowed in for weeks. You need to know this place before that happens. He picked up his axe, but didn't immediately return to chopping. "And you need real boots, real coat. Got some spare gear that might fit more or less. Won't be pretty, but it'll keep you alive." "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. Learning this place, learning how to survive here, it's hard. Harder than whatever you're imagining." "I believe you." "Do you?" Gideon drove the axe into the chopping block, leaving it there, turned to face her fully. "Every woman who came before you, they believed too. At first. But believing and doing ain't the same thing. Believing gets you started. Actually facing down your first real storm, your first night alone when something goes wrong, your first moment when you realize how far from help you really are. That's when believing stops mattering." Evelyn held his gaze. "Then I guess we'll find out what I'm made of." He stared at her for a long moment, those blue eyes searching her face for something. Weakness, maybe. Doubt. The first signs of the inevitable breaking point. Whatever he was looking for, he apparently didn't find it. "Get inside," he said finally. "I'll bring the gear in when I'm done here. We got a lot of work ahead of us, and most of it ain't gonna be pleasant." Evelyn nodded and turned back toward the house, her feet numb in her ruined boots. Behind her, she heard the axe bite into wood again. Thunk, 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 the rhythm of survival. She was starting to learn its beat. That afternoon, Gideon brought in a pile of clothes and dumped them on the kitchen table without ceremony. "Try these." Evelyn sorted through the pile, men's work clothes mostly. Heavy canvas pants, flannel shirts thick enough to stand on their own, a coat that smelled like wool and wood smoke, boots that would be too large but could work with extra socks. "These are yours," she said. "Were mine, before I grew into my full size. Been sitting in a trunk for years." He didn't look at her while speaking, addressing his words to the fireplace instead. "They'll fit poorly, but better poorly than freezing." "Where did you learn to speak like that?" The question clearly caught him off guard. "Like what?" "Properly." "Your letters were well written. Just now you said, 'They'll fit poorly, but better poorly than freezing,' instead of, 'They'll fit bad, but better than freezing.' You're educated, but you hide it." Gideon's jaw worked. "My mother insisted on schooling before she left, made sure I could read, write, figure. Then she—" He stopped, started over. "Don't matter now. Point is, those clothes will work until we can get you to town for proper gear." Before Evelyn could press further, he left again, the door closing with finality. She held up the canvas pants, trying to imagine herself in them. In Philadelphia, she'd never worn anything but dresses and skirts, carefully tailored to hide the female form while still displaying status. These pants were meant for function, built to move, to work, to survive. She went upstairs and changed. The pants were too long, too wide in the waist, but she rolled the cuffs and cinched them with a belt she found in the pile. The flannel shirt hung loose but provided warmth. The boots were impossible with her thin stockings, but she layered 3 pairs and made them work. When she looked at herself in the small mirror hanging in her room, she barely recognized the woman staring back. Evelyn Mercer from Philadelphia, with her proper dresses and her carefully arranged hair and her practiced social graces, had disappeared. In her place stood someone who looked ready for work. She went back downstairs and found Gideon building up the fire. "They fit," she announced. He turned, then stopped mid-motion when he saw her. For the first time since she'd arrived, something like surprise crossed his face. "You look—" He paused. "Different. Better or worse?" "Different," he repeated, turning back to the fire. But Evelyn thought she saw something, not quite a smile, but maybe the ghost of where a smile used to live, tug at the corner of his mouth. That evening, they ate dinner together. Not because Gideon sought out company, but because Evelyn made enough food for 2 and set 2 places at the table with an expectation that felt less like invitation and more like inevitability. He could either join her or explicitly refuse, and apparently refusing took more effort than sitting down. They ate in silence. Evelyn had learned not to push conversation. Gideon spoke when he had something specific to say, treating words like he treated everything else on the ranch, useful when necessary, wasteful when not. But halfway through the meal, he spoke. "Your husband, the first one. What happened to him?" Evelyn set down her fork carefully. His heart stopped. "You loved him?" "I thought I did. Turned out I loved who I thought he was, not who he actually was." Gideon nodded slowly, like this made sense to him. "And when you found out the difference?" "By then I was already married. And then I was a widow. And then I was receiving letters from men offering marriage like it was a business transaction." She met his eyes. "Yours was the only one that felt honest." "Most people don't want honest. They want pretty. Most people haven't been lied to by someone who made promises in pretty words." Something shifted in Gideon's expression. "Your husband, the first one, he hurt you." Not a question. Evelyn considered her answer carefully. "Not physically, but yes, he hurt me. And you came here anyway, to marry a stranger. Could have hurt you worse." "Could have," Evelyn agreed, "but your letters told me what to expect. He promised me the world and delivered debts and mistresses. You promised me nothing but hard work and a roof." Somehow, that felt safer. Gideon was quiet for a long time, his food getting cold on his plate. When he spoke again, his voice was rougher than before. "I won't hurt you," he said. I ain't that kind of man." "I know." "How could you know? You don't know me. I know you spent 3 days in a blizzard making sure the cattle were safe. I know you made coffee before I woke up. I know you're teaching me how to survive here instead of sending me back to town." Evelyn leaned forward slightly. "I know that every letter you wrote was honest about your flaws. And honesty like that doesn't come from cruel men. It comes from lonely ones." Gideon flinched like she'd hit him. "Don't," he said. "Don't what?" "Don't try to figure me out. Don't try to—" He stood abruptly, his chair scraping loud against the floor. "I gave you the truth about the ranch, about what life here is like. That don't give you permission to go digging into why I'm like this." "Gideon, I got work to finish." He grabbed his coat and left before she could respond. Evelyn sat alone at the table, listening to his footsteps crunch through snow toward the barn. She'd pushed too hard, said too much, revealed that she saw past the walls he'd built, but she didn't regret it, because for just a moment before he'd shut down, she'd seen something in his eyes that looked almost like relief, the relief of being seen, of not having to hide. She finished her dinner in silence, cleaned the dishes, and added wood to the fire. Outside, lamplight glowed in the barn windows. Inside the house, Evelyn settled into a chair with one of her books and waited. He'd come back eventually, to warm himself, to sleep, to simply exist in the same space. And tomorrow, they'd ride out together, and she'd learn more about this mountain, this ranch, this complicated man who'd rather freeze in a barn than admit he might need someone. Evelyn turned the page and smiled despite herself. She'd survived 4 days. She'd survive tomorrow too, and the day after that, for however long it took. The morning came too early and too cold. Evelyn woke to pre-dawn darkness and the sound of movement downstairs. By the time she dressed in her borrowed work clothes and descended to the kitchen, Gideon had already been up for what must have been hours. Fresh coffee steamed on the stove. The fire burned hot. And through the window, she could see him in the barn, moving between the stalls with that same efficient economy of motion she was beginning to recognize as his natural state. She poured coffee and stood by the window watching. He emerged from the barn leading 2 horses, a large buckskin gelding that moved with the calm authority of an animal that knew its own strength, and a smaller chestnut mare with a white blaze down her face. The mare's ears swiveled constantly, tracking every sound, every movement. Evelyn pulled on the too large coat and the oversized boots and stepped out into the morning. The cold drove needles into her lungs. Her breath came out in white clouds that hung in the still air. Above the mountains, the sky was lightening from black to deep purple, stars still visible in the west. "Her name's Cider," Gideon said without preamble, nodding toward the mare. "She's 8 years old, knows the property better than most people. Won't spook easy, won't run off. Best horse for learning." Evelyn approached slowly, extending her hand. Cider snuffled at her palm, breath warm against her frozen fingers. "When's the last time you rode?" Gideon asked. "I told you, 15 years. "Then we start with the basics." He handed her the reins. "Mount up. Left side, left foot in the stirrup. Swing your right leg over. Don't think about it too much. The hesitation's what gets people hurt." Evelyn gripped the saddle horn, feeling the mare shift beneath her touch. It had been so long. Back in Philadelphia, she'd ridden in a carefully controlled park on carefully trained horses that never did anything unexpected. This felt different, wilder, real. She put her foot in the stirrup and pulled herself up. The world looked different from horseback. Higher, more exposed. The mare shifted, and Evelyn's hands tightened on the reins. "Relax," Gideon said. "She feels your tension. You grip tight. She thinks there's danger." "There might be danger. I haven't done this in years." "Ain't no danger in my front yard. Breathe, settle. Let your weight sink down instead of holding yourself up." Evelyn tried to follow his instructions, loosened her death grip on the reins, let her shoulders drop. The mare's ears flicked back, listening. "Better," Gideon said. He swung onto his own horse with the unconscious grace of someone who'd been riding since before he could walk. "We'll go slow. Just down to the south fence and back. Maybe 2 miles total. You feel like you can't handle it, you tell me. No shame in stopping." "I can handle it." He looked at her, something that might have been amusement flickering across his face. "You say that a lot. I can handle it, like you're trying to convince yourself." "Maybe I am. At least you're honest about it." He turned his horse toward the fence line. "Come on, stay behind me. Let Cider follow Buck. She knows the path." They rode out as the sun began its climb over the eastern peaks. The ranch in daylight revealed itself differently than in storm or darkness. The valley spread wide, ringed by mountains that looked close enough to touch, but Evelyn knew must be miles away. Snow covered everything in uneven drifts, sculpted by wind into shapes that looked almost deliberate. Fence lines divided the white expanse into geometric sections where cattle clustered, dark shapes against the snow. "How many head?" Evelyn asked, her voice sounding small in all that space. 243, last count. Lost 5 in the fall to wolves. 3 calves born in October. 1 didn't make it." He spoke like he was reciting inventory, but Evelyn heard something else underneath. Pride, maybe, or the particular attachment that came from keeping something alive against odds. They rode in silence for a while, Cider following Buck's path through the snow. Evelyn's thighs were already burning, muscles she'd forgotten she had, protesting the unaccustomed position. Her hands ached from gripping the reins. But she didn't complain. "That line of trees," Gideon said, pointing to a dark smudge against the white. "That's Black Ridge Creek. Runs year-round, never freezes completely. Water source for the cattle when everything else locks up. You ever need to find your way back to the house and you're lost, follow the creek south. It'll bring you home." Home. He said it so casually, like she belonged here, like this place could be hers too. "And there," he continued, indicating a rocky outcrop to the east. "That's Eagle Point. Wolves den up there sometimes. Don't go near it alone, especially not at dusk. That's when they hunt." Have you ever been attacked? Once, 3 years back. Got between a she-wolf and her kill. She came at me hard enough that I had to shoot her. His voice went flat. Hated doing it. She was just protecting what was hers. But it was her or me, and I chose me. Evelyn studied his profile. You don't like killing things. No, but I do it when I have to. That's what living out here means. Making hard choices because there ain't soft options available. They reached the south fence and Gideon dismounted to check the posts. Evelyn watched him test each one, looking for weakness or damage, his movements methodical and thorough. This was a man who understood that small failures led to large catastrophes. A fence post that seemed fine today could fail tomorrow, and in a storm, that failure could mean lost cattle, which meant lost money, which meant a winter without enough supplies. Everything connected. Everything mattered. You do this every day? She asked. Every few days, weather permitting. He remounted. Winter's hardest because you can't see problems developing under the snow. Come spring, you find out what failed while you weren't looking. They turned back toward the house, and Evelyn let herself ask the question that had been building. How long have you been alone out here? Gideon's shoulders tensed, but he answered, 8 years. Since my father died. And before that? Before that, I had him. And before him, I had my mother until I was 10. Then it was just me and him. What happened to her? The silence stretched so long Evelyn thought he wouldn't answer. But finally his voice came out rough and low. She left, woke up one morning, packed a bag, and walked down that mountain. Never came back. Never wrote. Never sent word. Just gone. Evelyn's chest tightened. I'm sorry. Don't be. It was a long time ago. That doesn't make it hurt less. Gideon's hands flexed on the reins. My father said she couldn't handle the isolation. Said the mountain drove her mad, and I'd do the same to any woman I brought up here. Spent the rest of his life proving himself right. Drove away anyone who tried to get close. Died alone in that house. And I found him 3 days later when I came back from moving cattle. That's why you wrote those letters, Evelyn said quietly. Warning women away. You were doing what your father did, proving it couldn't work before anyone had a chance to prove otherwise. Maybe. His jaw was tight. Or maybe I was being realistic. 9 women tried, Evelyn. 9. And every single one of them left. Did they leave because of the mountain, or because you made sure they'd leave? The question hung between them like ice. Gideon pulled his horse to a stop, turned to look at her fully. His eyes held something dangerous. Not anger exactly, but close to it. The look of a man forced to face a truth he'd been avoiding. You think you know me, he said, after less than a week. You think you've figured it all out. I think you're lonely. I think you've been lonely for so long you've convinced yourself it's what you deserve. And I think you push people away before they can leave on their own, because at least that way you're in control of when it happens. And what makes you different? What makes you think you won't leave too? Evelyn met his gaze steadily. Because I've already been left. By my parents when they died. By my husband when he chose other women and bad debts over our marriage. I know what abandonment feels like, Gideon. And I know I'd rather choose isolation honestly than surround myself with people who make me feel alone anyway. Something cracked in his expression, not breaking, more like ice beginning to thaw. The house, he said after a long moment. When you walked in, you said it felt empty, lifeless. Yes, that's because it is. After my mother left, my father stripped out everything that reminded him of her. Every decoration, every soft thing, every piece of evidence that someone had tried to make it a home. Turned it into what you saw. A place for surviving, not living. He looked back toward the distant house. And I kept it that way. Because changing it felt like hoping, and hope gets you hurt worse than anything. So you stopped hoping. I stopped expecting things to be different than they were. Evelyn urged Cider forward until she was beside him. Close enough to see the lines around his eyes, the gray threading through his dark hair, the particular weariness of someone who'd carried weight alone for too long. What if they could be different? She asked. They can't. What if they already are? Gideon looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time Evelyn saw something besides wariness in his eyes. Surprise, maybe. Or the fragile beginning of something that might eventually become trust. We should get back, he said finally. Storm's coming. Can you smell it? Evelyn breathed deep. The air did smell different, sharper, charged with something electric. How long? Few hours. Maybe less. He turned Buck toward home. Enough time to get you inside, and the cattle moved to lower pasture. They rode back in silence, but it felt different now. Less like two strangers occupying the same space, and more like two people beginning to figure out how to exist together. By the time they reached the ranch, Evelyn's entire body ached. Her legs trembled when she dismounted, and she had to grab the saddle to keep from falling. Gideon noticed. "First ride's always hardest. You'll be sore tomorrow." "I'm sore now." "Then you'll be worse tomorrow." But he took Cider's reins from her. "Get inside, warm up. I'll handle the horses." Evelyn nodded and limped toward the house, every step a reminder that her body wasn't used to this kind of work. Inside, she shed the coat and boots and stood by the fire, feeling warmth seep back into her frozen hands. Through the window, she watched Gideon unsaddle both horses, his movements efficient despite the approaching storm. He didn't hurry, didn't cut corners, each task completed fully before moving to the next. An hour later, he came in stamping snow from his boots. "Storm's here," he announced. "Going to be a bad one. Could last a week." "A week?" "Maybe longer. Welcome to mountain winter." He pulled off his gloves, flexing his fingers. "You learn to read the signs. You can usually tell. This one feels mean. Temperatures dropping fast, winds shifting northeast. That means heavy snow." Evelyn looked at the well-stocked pantry, the wood piled high beside the fireplace. "We have enough supplies? For a month if we need it. Longer if we're careful." He crossed to the stove, poured coffee. "But being snowed in that long, it does things to people. The silence gets heavy. The walls feel like they're closing in. You start hearing things that ain't there." "Have you experienced that?" "Every winter." He drank his coffee black, grimacing at the heat. "Usually takes about 3 weeks before I start talking to the cattle like they're people. 4 weeks before they start talking back." It took Evelyn a moment to realize he was joking. Almost joking, anyway. The corner of his mouth lifted slightly, there and gone so fast she might have imagined it. "I'll try to be more interesting company than the cattle," she said. "Remains to be seen. Some of them are pretty engaging conversationalists." Evelyn laughed, couldn't help it. The sound surprised her, echoing strange in the usually silent house. Gideon looked up sharply, like he'd heard gunfire instead of laughter. "What?" Evelyn asked. "Nothing, just—" He shook his head. "Nothing." But she knew what. The house wasn't used to laughter, wasn't used to lightness. For 8 years, it had held only silence and work, and the particular loneliness of a man who'd taught himself not to want company. Outside, the storm arrived with violence. Wind slammed against the house, rattling windows and finding every crack in the walls. Snow came horizontal, driven by gusts that sounded like something alive and angry. They spent the afternoon in separate activities. Gideon worked on tack repair, his hands steady as he stitched leather. Evelyn attempted to read but found herself watching him instead, the way his brow furrowed in concentration, the careful precision of each stitch. "You're staring," he said without looking up. "Sorry, I didn't mean—" "Ain't saying you should stop, just stating fact." Evelyn felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I was watching you work. It's different from what I'm used to. In Philadelphia, if something broke, you hired someone to fix it. Here, you just fix it yourself. Ain't nobody else to do it." He tested the repair, tugging hard on the leather. "That's what the mountain teaches you, self-reliance, because help ain't coming." "Is that lonely, knowing help isn't coming?" Gideon's hands stilled. He looked up at her, those blue eyes unreadable. "You ask a lot of questions. You don't have to answer them." "No, but you keep asking anyway." He set down the tack. "It ain't lonely if you never expected help in the first place. You can't miss what you never had." "I think that's a lie you tell yourself." "Maybe." He stood, crossed to the window. "Storm's getting worse. I need to check on the cattle one more time before it gets dark." "I'll come with you." "No." "Gideon, no," he repeated, firmer. "You ain't ready for this. Wind out there will knock you down. Cold will freeze your lungs if you breathe wrong, and visibility's maybe 10 feet. You go out there, you die. It's that simple. Then how is it safe for you?" "It ain't, but I know the path blind. Done it 100 times in worse storms than this." He pulled on his heavy coat. "Stay inside. Keep the fire going. If I ain't back in an hour, don't come looking. You hear me? Don't come looking." Fear spiked through her chest. "What am I supposed to do if you don't come back?" "Wait until morning. If the storm clears, ride Cider down to town. Tell Walter Boone what happened. He'll know what to do. Gideon's voice was matter-of-fact, discussing his potential death like it was just another chore. You'll be fine. Supplies will last until spring. I don't care about supplies. I care about... Evelyn stopped, shocked by the intensity of her own reaction. She'd known this man less than a week, had spoken to him maybe a dozen times, but the thought of him not coming back, of being alone in this house knowing he was frozen somewhere in the snow, it made her chest tight. Gideon was watching her with an expression she couldn't read. You care about what? About not being a widow twice before I'm 35, and something shifted in his face. I'll be back, he said, quieter now. I always come back. Then he was gone, swallowed by white. Evelyn stood at the window, watching the place where he'd disappeared, seeing nothing but snow. The wind screamed, the house shook, and she understood, finally, what it meant to live on this mountain. Every storm was a threat. Every winter was survival. And the loneliness wasn't just emotional, it was existential. The knowledge that you could die and no one would know for days, weeks, maybe longer. She added wood to the fire, made dinner she didn't eat, paced the main room, tracking time by the clock on the mantel. 30 minutes passed. 45. An hour. Evelyn pulled on the coat, preparing to break his command and go looking despite the danger. The door burst open. Gideon stumbled in, covered head to toe in snow, ice crusted in his beard and eyebrows. He slammed the door against the wind and stood there breathing hard, steam rising from his coat. Cattle are secure, he said. His voice was rough, scraped raw by cold. Lost part of the north fence. Have to repair it when the storm breaks. Evelyn crossed to him, hands shaking with relief she didn't want to examine too closely. You're frozen. Get out of those clothes. I'm fine. You're not fine. Your lips are blue. She started unbuttoning his coat, her fingers clumsy. Don't argue. Just let me help. For a moment she thought he'd refuse. Push her away. Insist on doing everything alone like he always did. But instead he stood still and let her work the buttons free, peel the frozen coat from his shoulders. Underneath, his shirt was damp with melted snow. His hands shook when he tried to unfasten the buttons. Sit, Evelyn commanded, pointing to the chair by the fire. I'll make coffee. Evelyn, sit. He sat. She made coffee strong enough to strip paint, added whiskey from a bottle she'd found in the pantry, and pressed the cup into his hands. He drank it down without comment, color slowly returning to his face. You should have stayed inside, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. You said yourself how dangerous it was. Cattle needed checking. And if you died out there, what good would that have done the cattle? Gideon looked up at her, surprised. You're angry. Evelyn stopped. Was she angry? No. Scared. Scared in a way that felt too big, too soon, too complicated for less than a week of knowing someone. You told me not to come looking if you didn't return. Do you know what that means? Sitting here waiting, not knowing if you're alive or dead? That's cruelty, Gideon. Maybe not intentional, but cruelty all the same. I've done it alone for 8 years. Well, you're not alone anymore? The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Gideon set down his empty cup. Slowly he stood, close enough now that Evelyn could see the ice still melting in his beard, the way his hands had finally stopped shaking. No, he said quietly. I guess I'm not. He reached out, hesitated, then touched her cheek with rough, work-scarred fingers. The touch lasted maybe 3 seconds before he pulled back, but Evelyn felt it long after. Thank you, he said, for waiting, for caring if I came back. Of course I cared. That ain't as of course as you think. Before Evelyn could respond, he moved past her toward the stairs. I need to change into dry clothes. You should eat something. Going to be a long night. She listened to his footsteps on the stairs, the creak of floorboards above her head. Her cheek still tingled where he touched it. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, something had shifted, something neither of them had names for yet, but both of them felt. Evelyn made herself eat the dinner she'd prepared earlier. Cold now, but she barely tasted it anyway. When Gideon came back down wearing dry clothes, his hair still damp from melted snow, he sat across from her at the table. They ate in silence, but it wasn't the uncomfortable silence of strangers. It was something else, something that felt almost like companionship. After dinner, Gideon built up the fire while Evelyn washed dishes. The storm showed no signs of easing. If anything, it seemed to be getting worse, the wind howling like something in pain. You ever hear the legend about the mountain? Gideon asked suddenly. Evelyn turned from the sink. What legend? Local story. Says that the mountain's alive. Says it tests everyone who tries to live on it, and most people fail. The ones who pass, the ones who survive, become part of it. Like they trade something human for something wild. Do you believe that? Gideon stared into the fire. Sometimes. When I've been alone too long, when the winter gets so deep I forget what green looks like, when the silence gets so heavy I can't remember what my own voice sounds like. Yeah. Sometimes I believe it. What do you think the mountain takes? In the trade? Hope, maybe. The ability to imagine anything different. He looked at her. What do you think it's taking from you? Evelyn considered the question seriously. I don't think it's taking anything. I think it's showing me what I'm made of. And maybe that's scarier than losing something. Why is that scary? Because what if I'm not made of enough? Gideon stood, crossed to where she stood by the sink. He was close enough that she could see the darker blue ring around his irises, the small scar cutting through his eyebrow. You rode out in a storm today, he said. You watched me almost not come back and got angry instead of crying. You're wearing my old clothes and eating plain food and sleeping in a house that's colder than any place you've ever lived. And you ain't complained once. His hand came up, hovered near her face, but didn't quite touch. You're made of enough. How do you know? Because you're still here. The fire crackled. The wind screamed. And Evelyn realized they were standing close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, could count the breaths between his words. Gideon, she said softly, what are we doing? I don't know. His voice was rough. I stopped knowing what I was doing the moment you stepped off that stagecoach and didn't run. I'm not going to run. Everyone runs eventually. Not everyone. Evelyn lifted her hand, placed it flat against his chest, felt his heart beating hard beneath her palm. Not me. He covered her hand with his own, holding it there. They stood like that, breathing together, while the storm tried to tear the world apart outside. Finally, Gideon stepped back. It's late. You should sleep. What about you? I'll keep the fire going, make sure the house stays warm. You need sleep too. I'll sleep later. Evelyn wanted to argue, wanted to insist he take care of himself the way he took care of everything else. But she recognized the stubborn set of his jaw, the way his shoulders carried tension like armor. Good night, Gideon. Good night. She climbed the stairs to her room, changed into her nightgown, and slid between cold sheets. But sleep wouldn't come. She lay awake, listening to the storm, listening to the house settle, listening to the sound of footsteps downstairs as Gideon moved around tending the fire. At some point, exhaustion won. She drifted into uneasy sleep, dreaming of snow and silence and a man with winter blue eyes who'd forgotten how to let anyone close. When she woke, gray dawn light filtered through her window. The storm still raged, and downstairs she could hear the familiar sounds of Gideon already awake, already working, already surviving another day on the mountain that had taken so much from him. Evelyn dressed in the borrowed clothes that were becoming familiar now. Went downstairs to find coffee made, and Gideon staring out the window at the white world beyond. Morning, she said. He turned and she saw something in his face she hadn't seen before. Not quite a smile. Gideon didn't seem to know how to smile anymore. But something softer, something that looked almost like welcome. Morning, he replied. Storm's still bad. Going to be another day inside. Then I guess we'd better figure out how to talk to each other. I ain't much for talking. I know, but I think you're better at it than you give yourself credit for. Evelyn poured coffee, added too much sugar the way she liked it. Tell me something true, Gideon. Something you've never told anyone. He looked at her like she'd asked him to cut off his arm. Why? Because we're married. Because we're snowed in together. Because pretending we're strangers is exhausting, and I'd rather know you than wonder about you. Gideon was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, finally, he spoke. I'm afraid, he said. Every day. Afraid I'll fail at something and lose the ranch. Afraid I'll end up like my father, so alone I forget why I'm alive. Afraid that the mountain already took whatever part of me knew how to be human, and there's nothing left worth knowing. Evelyn's throat tightened. There's plenty worth knowing. How would you know? You've seen me at my worst, barely talking, pushing you away, eating dinner like it's a chore instead of... He stopped. started again. You don't know what I was like before. Before my mother left. Before my father turned mean with loneliness. I was different, I think. Tell me, Evelyn said softly. Tell me what you were like. And slowly, haltingly, with the storm raging outside and the fire burning low, Gideon began to talk. He told her about being a boy who loved reading, who'd sneak books into the barn and read by lantern light. About how his mother used to sing while she cooked, filling the house with sound. About learning to ride before he could properly walk. About the first time he'd helped birth a calf and felt the weight of life in his hands. He told her about this day his mother left, how he'd woken to silence and known immediately something was wrong. About finding the note she'd left, just 3 sentences saying she couldn't do it anymore, couldn't be that isolated, couldn't watch the mountain swallow her whole. He told her about his father's slow transformation from grief to bitterness to a kind of hostile survival that pushed away anything soft or kind. And he told her about the day his father died, and how Gideon had stood in the barn and realized he was completely, utterly alone for the first time in his life. That's when I should have left, he said. Sold the ranch, moved to town, done something different. But I didn't. I stayed. Because this place, for all the pain it holds, it's the only home I've ever known. Evelyn listened to every word, watching emotions play across his face that she suspected he didn't even know he was showing. Pain, loneliness, a desperate hope he probably didn't want to admit to having. When he finished, silence filled the space between them. Thank you, Evelyn said finally, for telling me. Does it change anything, knowing all that? Yes. How? Now I know you're not broken. You're just hurt, and hurt can heal. Gideon's eyes met hers, and in them she saw something crack open. Not breaking, opening. Like a door that had been locked so long everyone forgot it could still move. I don't know how to do this, he admitted. He gestured vaguely between them. Whatever this is. Neither do I. But maybe that's okay. Maybe we figure it out together. Outside, the storm continued its assault on the mountain. But inside the house that had been empty for so long, 2 people sat by the fire and slowly, carefully, began the work of learning how to not be alone. The storm broke on the 5th day, leaving behind a world transformed into something unrecognizable. Snow reached halfway up the barn walls. Drifts sculpted by wind created strange formations that looked like frozen waves. The fence lines had vanished entirely beneath white, and the path to town, already rough in good weather, had ceased to exist. Gideon stood on the porch that morning, surveying the damage with an expression Evelyn was learning to read. Not quite worry, more like calculation, adding up all the work ahead and measuring it against daylight hours and strength remaining. How bad? She asked from the doorway. Could be worse. Roof held, barns intact, cattle survived. He pulled on his gloves, but we're cut off. Won't be able to get to town for at least 2 weeks, maybe 3. Roads impassable. What about supplies? We're fine, like I said, prepared for this. He glanced back at her. You holding up all right? It was the first time he'd asked directly. During the storm, they'd fallen into a rhythm that felt almost comfortable, working in parallel, sharing meals, talking in short bursts when the silence felt too heavy. But he'd never actually asked how she was managing. I'm fine, Evelyn said. You sure? 5 days stuck inside with nothing but me for company, that's enough to make most people lose their minds. Most people aren't me. Something that might have been a smile tugged at his mouth. No, I'm starting to figure that out. He worked all day digging out the barn, clearing paths, checking on cattle that had huddled together for warmth. Evelyn helped where she could, shoveling snow, hauling water that had to be broken free from ice, learning the particular grammar of ranch work in winter. By evening, every muscle in her body screamed protest. Her hands were raw despite the gloves. Her back felt like it had been beaten with boards. But when Gideon came in for dinner, there was something different in his expression, something that looked almost like respect. You worked hard today, he said. So did you. Yeah, but I'm used to it. He paused, choosing words carefully. You didn't have to do all that. Could have stayed inside where it's warm. We're partners, aren't we? In this, whatever this is. Supposed to be. Most of the women who came before, they didn't see it that way. Saw it more like I was supposed to do the work while they made the house pretty. Evelyn poured coffee, her hands shaking slightly from exhaustion. I don't know how to make things pretty. I know how to work. That's all I've got to offer. That's more than enough. They ate in companionable silence, the kind that had stopped feeling awkward. Outside, the temperature was dropping fast. Gideon had predicted it would hit well below zero by midnight, the kind of cold that killed anything caught outside unprepared. After dinner, while Evelyn washed dishes, Gideon disappeared upstairs. She heard him moving around, the sound of drawers opening and closing. When he came back down, he carried something wrapped in cloth. "Here," he said, setting it on the table. Evelyn dried her hands and unwrapped the bundle. Inside was a coat, not the oversized one she'd been borrowing, but something different, smaller, clearly altered to fit someone her size. "You made this?" "Adjusted it. Was my mother's. Been in that trunk upstairs for 20 years. Gideon shifted his weight, uncomfortable. "Figured it should get used, better than wasting away in storage." Evelyn lifted the coat carefully. Heavy wool, lined with fur that had been carefully maintained despite decades in a trunk. The stitching was meticulous, the alterations invisible unless you knew to look for them. "When did you do this?" "During the storm, while you were sleeping. Ain't much to do when you're stuck inside." He wouldn't meet her eyes. "Try it on. Make sure it fits right." She slipped into the coat. It fit perfectly, snug across the shoulders, long enough to protect her thighs, warm in a way her Philadelphia coat had never been. And something about wearing something that had belonged to his mother, that he'd taken the time to alter specifically for her, made Evelyn's throat tight. "It's perfect," she managed. "Good. You'll need it. We're heading to town tomorrow." "Tomorrow? You just said the road was impassable." "For wagons. Not for horses. If you know the route." Gideon finally looked at her. "You need proper clothes. Boots that fit, pants that ain't falling off you. And people need to see you're still here, otherwise the gossip will start." "What kind of gossip?" "The kind that says I killed you and buried your body in the snow. Happened before, not the killing part, but the rumors. Town's got nothing better to do than speculate about the crazy mountain rancher." Evelyn buttoned the coat, feeling the weight of it settle on her shoulders. "Let them speculate. What do we care what they think?" "I don't, but you might. Once you hear what they say about me, I doubt they can say anything worse than what you've already told me about yourself." Gideon's expression shifted, surprise, then something that looked almost like relief. "You really don't care, do you, about reputations and what's proper and what people think?" "I cared once, back in Philadelphia. Cared so much it nearly killed me, trying to maintain appearances while my husband destroyed everything behind closed doors." Evelyn met his eyes. "I'm done caring what strangers think. I'd rather know the truth and be judged for it than live a comfortable lie. The truth about me ain't comfortable." "I know. That's why I trust it." They left at dawn the next morning, riding single file through snow that came up to the horses' chests in places. Gideon led, breaking trail on buck while Evelyn followed on cider. The world had gone silent in the way only deep snow could create, all sound muffled, absorbed by white. The ride took 3 hours instead of the usual 2. By the time they reached Grover's Bluff, Evelyn's legs were numb and her face felt frozen despite the scarf wrapped around it. But they'd made it. The town looked different after a week on the mountain. Smaller, somehow, more fragile. The buildings clustered together like they were afraid of all that wilderness pressing in around them. They tied the horses outside the general store, and Evelyn followed Gideon inside. The warmth hit first, a pot-bellied stove throwing heat into the cramped space. Then the smell, coffee, tobacco, leather, wood smoke. And finally, the silence. Conversation stopped mid-word as everyone turned to stare. Walter Boone stood behind the counter, his expression cycling rapidly through surprise, confusion, and something that might have been concern. "Gideon," he said carefully, "didn't expect to see you in town. Storm was bad." "Storm was fine. We managed." Gideon's hand found the small of Evelyn's back, a gesture so unexpected she almost flinched. "Need to outfit Mrs. Blackridge properly. Can't have her freezing in city clothes." The use of her married name said aloud in front of witnesses created a ripple of whispers. 2 women in the corner, wearing dresses too fancy for a frontier town, clearly trying to maintain Eastern standards, leaned together, murmuring. Walter's eyes moved from Gideon to Evelyn and back. "You stayed through the storm?" "Obviously," Evelyn said. "Where else would I be?" "Well, it's just, most women who go up that mountain, they don't—" Walter stopped, clearly realizing he was about to insult either Gideon, Evelyn, or both. "Don't what?" Gideon's voice was flat, dangerous. Don't last more than a few weeks? Don't stick around once they realize what they agreed to? Don't stay with a man like me. The store had gone completely silent now. Even the stove seemed to stop crackling. Walter raised his hands in a placating gesture. I didn't mean— Yes, you did. Everyone in this town means it. Been meaning it for 8 years. Gideon's hand was still on Evelyn's back, and she could feel the tension radiating through his body. But my wife ain't like the others. She's made of different stuff. So how about instead of gossiping about how long until she leaves, you help us find her some proper winter gear so we can get back home? Home. He said it like he meant it, like the ranch was their shared space, not just his. Walter nodded quickly. Of course. Sarah, he called toward the back room, come help Mrs. Blackridge with the women's clothing. A woman emerged, Walter's wife, Evelyn assumed. She was younger than Walter, with kind eyes and hands reddened from work. Mrs. Blackridge, she said warmly, welcome. Let's see what we can find for you. She led Evelyn to a corner of the store where practical clothing hung on pegs. Wool pants, flannel shirts, heavy coats designed for survival rather than fashion. As they sorted through options, Sarah spoke quietly. Don't mind the gossip. This town doesn't have much excitement, so they make drama where there isn't any. I'm not worried about gossip. No, I can see that. Sarah held up a pair of pants, measuring them against Evelyn. These might work. You're taller than most women we get through here. She paused. Can I ask you something? Go ahead. Are you happy? Up there on that mountain with him? Evelyn considered the question seriously. I don't know if happy is the right word, but I'm present. I'm living instead of just existing. Does that make sense? Sarah smiled. More than you know. Walter and I, we came out here 5 years ago, left everything we knew in Boston. Everyone said we were crazy, that the frontier would eat us alive. But sometimes the thing that looks dangerous from the outside is exactly what you need. She found boots, thick socks, undergarments designed for cold. Gideon Blackridge has a reputation in this town. People think he's hard, mean even. But I've watched him trade furs, sell cattle, handle business. He's fair, honest. That counts for more than charm. They brought the clothes to the counter where Gideon was settling accounts with Walter. The two men in the corner, ranchers based on their clothing, were watching Gideon with expressions that mixed curiosity and something darker. Blackridge, one of them called out. He was thick through the middle, with a beard that needed trimming and eyes that held challenge. Heard you got yourself another wife. Gideon didn't turn around. You heard right, Connell. How long you give this one? I got money says she don't make it to Christmas. The store went silent again. Evelyn felt Gideon's entire body go rigid. You want to repeat that? Gideon's voice was quiet, which somehow made it more dangerous. Connell stood up, moving closer. Just stating facts. You've run off, 9 women now? 10? Man's got to wonder what you're doing up there to make them all leave so fast. Nothing I'm doing. Maybe they just got smart and realized mountain life ain't for everyone. Or maybe, Connell said, grinning meanly, you're just too broken for any woman to stomach. Your daddy was the same way. Drove your mama off, died alone and bitter. You're walking the same path. Gideon moved so fast, Evelyn barely tracked it. One moment he was standing at the counter, the next he had Connell by the collar, slammed against the wall hard enough to rattle the shelves. You want to talk about my father? About my mother? Gideon's face was inches from Connell's. Go ahead, but leave my wife out of it. Gideon, Walter said nervously, let's all calm down. I am calm. But he wasn't. Evelyn could see the tremor in his shoulders, the white-knuckle grip on Connell's shirt, years of anger bubbling up, looking for release. Gideon, Evelyn said quietly. Not a command, just his name. He turned his head slightly, not releasing Connell but acknowledging her. He's not worth it, she said. He insulted you. He insulted us both, and he's still not worth it. Evelyn crossed to him, placed her hand on his arm. Let him go, we have what we came for, let's go home. For a long moment, Gideon didn't move. Then slowly, he released Connell and stepped back. Connell straightened his shirt, his face red. You're making a mistake staying with him, lady. He'll break your heart, or your spirit, probably both. Evelyn turned to face him fully. Mr. Connell, I appreciate your concern, but my heart's already been broken by a charming liar who smiled while he destroyed me. I'll take an honest, hard man over that any day. And as for my spirit, I think you'll find it's stronger than you imagine. She picked up the bundle of clothes they'd purchased. Walter, put this on our account. We'll settle up when we come back next month. Then she walked out of the store, not waiting to see if Gideon followed. He did, catching up to her at the horses. I shouldn't have grabbed him, Gideon said. Probably not. When he talked about you like that, like you were just another woman who'd leave, he stopped, struggling with words. I know. Evelyn began tying her bundle to Cider's saddle, but fighting him won't change what people think. Only time will do that. You shouldn't have to put up with that kind of talk. I've put up with worse. Philadelphia society had very creative ways of destroying reputations. This is nothing. Gideon helped her secure the bundle, his movements rougher than necessary. Connell's right about one thing. My father did die alone, did turn bitter and mean. And his voice caught. I am walking the same path, or I was, until you showed up and refused to leave like you were supposed to. Evelyn mounted Cider, looking down at him. I'm not leaving, Gideon, no matter how many people bet against us. They rode out of town with curious eyes following them. Evelyn didn't look back. She kept her focus forward, on the mountains rising white against blue sky, on the narrow trail leading home. Home. When had she started thinking of it that way? The ride back was harder. The horses were tired, the trail more treacherous going uphill. By the time they reached the ranch, the sun was dropping toward the western peaks, and the temperature with it. Gideon handled the horses while Evelyn brought the supplies inside. She changed into her new clothes, pants that actually fit, a shirt that didn't hang loose, boots that supported her ankles properly. When she looked at herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. No more traces of Philadelphia. This woman looked capable, hard, ready. Downstairs, she found Gideon sitting at the table, staring at nothing. You all right? She asked. I embarrassed you today, in front of the whole town. You defended me. That's different. Is it? Because from where I'm sitting, I proved everyone right, that I'm too quick to anger, too rough around the edges, He stopped. Too much like my father. Evelyn sat down across from him. You're not your father? How do you know? You never met him. Because your father drove your mother away and then spent the rest of his life making sure no one else got close. You're doing the opposite. You're trying to let me in, even though it terrifies you. Gideon's hands clenched on the table. It does terrify me. Every day I wake up expecting you to say you're done, that you want to leave, that this was all a mistake, and I don't. His voice broke. I don't know what I'll do when that happens. What if it doesn't happen? It always happens. Not always. Evelyn reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. Your mother left. I understand that hurt you, and your father taught you that everyone leaves eventually. But Gideon, I'm not your mother, and you're not your father. We're just two people trying to figure out how to survive on this mountain without losing ourselves in the process. He looked at their joined hands like he didn't quite believe they were real. Why did you really come here? The truth, not the pretty version. Evelyn took a breath. Because I was dying in Philadelphia. Not physically, but everything that mattered was dying. I spent 3 years as a widow, watching people whisper about my husband's debts and his affairs. 3 years of being pitied and judged and treated like damaged goods. 3 years of realizing that the life I thought I wanted, society parties and fine dresses and all that comfort, it was all hollow, empty. And I couldn't breathe anymore. So you chose the mountain. I chose honesty. I chose a life that didn't require me to pretend everything was fine when it wasn't. I chose you because your letters were the first real thing I'd encountered in years. Gideon's thumb moved against her palm, a small, unconscious gesture. And now? Now that you know what you chose? Now I'm still here. Still choosing it. Still choosing you. He stood abruptly, pulling his hand away, walked to the window. I don't know how to do this, Evelyn. How to be... He gestured helplessly. Whatever you need me to be. I don't need you to be anything except what you are. What I am is broken. No. Evelyn stood, cross to him. What you are is hurt and lonely and scared of being hurt more. But that's not the same as broken. Gideon turned to face her, and in his eyes she saw something raw and desperate. Every woman who came before you, they all tried to fix me, tried to make me softer, more talkative, more like town men. And I can't be that. This is who I am. I know. I don't want you softer. I don't want you different. Evelyn stepped closer. I just want you honest. That's all I've ever wanted. They stood there in the fading light, close enough that Evelyn could see the pulse beating in his throat, could feel the heat radiating from his body despite the cold room. I'm afraid, Gideon said quietly, afraid of wanting this, wanting you, and having it taken away. I'm afraid too, but maybe being afraid together is better than being safe and alone. Gideon's hand came up slowly, cupping her cheek the way he had once before. But this time he didn't pull away. This time his thumb traced the line of her cheekbone, his touch rough and gentle at the same time. You're real, he said, like he was trying to convince himself. You're actually real. I'm real. And you're staying. I'm staying. He kissed her then. Not smoothly, not with practiced charm. It was awkward and uncertain, the kiss of a man who'd forgotten how, or maybe never really learned. But it was honest, and for Evelyn, that was everything. When they pulled apart, Gideon looked stunned. I shouldn't have. Should have. We barely know each other. We're married, we live together, we work together every day. We've survived storms and town gossip and your terrible coffee, Evelyn smiled. I think we know each other better than most married couples do after years. Something eased in his expression. Not quite a smile, but close. My coffee's not that terrible. It's awful, but I drink it anyway because you make it for me before I wake up. You notice that? I notice everything about you. Gideon's arms came around her, pulling her close. He held her like she was something precious and fragile, which Evelyn found both touching and slightly amusing given how much hard labor she'd been doing. Thank you, he murmured against her hair. For what? For not giving up. On this place. On me. Evelyn wrapped her arms around him, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart. Thank you for letting me stay. They stood like that as darkness fell outside and the temperature dropped and the mountain settled in for another frozen night. But inside the house, something had changed. The emptiness that had lived in these walls for so long was finally, slowly, beginning to fill with something else. Not hope. Neither of them was ready to call it that yet. But possibility. And for two people who'd spent years surviving instead of living, that was enough. Later, after dinner, after the fire had been built up against the night, after the comfortable silence of two people learning to share space, Gideon spoke again. The town's going to talk. About us. About you staying. Let them talk. It might get ugly. Connell's got friends, and they like stirring trouble. I can handle ugly. I've handled worse. Gideon looked at her across the firelight. You keep saying that, about handling things. But you shouldn't have to. You should... He stopped, frustrated. Should what? Should have someone protecting you from ugly, making things easier. Gideon, I didn't come here for easy. I came here for real. Evelyn set down the sewing she'd been working on, mending a tear in one of his shirts. And real includes ugly sometimes, includes town gossip and hard work and freezing winters. I knew that when I came. But did you know how hard it would be? Really? No, but I'm learning, and I haven't run yet. Yet, he repeated. I'm not going to. How can you be sure? Evelyn considered the question seriously. How could she be sure? She'd known him less than 2 weeks, had lived on this mountain through one storm, had barely begun to understand what the isolation really meant, what the winters would demand, what surviving here would cost. But she was sure. Somehow, inexplicably, she was sure. Because, she said finally, I'd rather be here with you, struggling through hard things, than anywhere else pretending everything's fine. I've lived the lie. This might be brutal and cold and lonely sometimes, but at least it's true. Gideon was quiet for a long time. Then he stood, crossed to where she sat, and knelt beside her chair. I don't have pretty words, he said. Don't know how to make promises that sound good. But I can promise you this. I'll never lie to you, never pretend things are better than they are. And I'll work every day to make this place somewhere you want to stay, not somewhere you're trapped. Evelyn touched his face, feeling the roughness of his beard, the warmth of his skin. That's all I need. He leaned into her touch, and for a moment they just stayed like that, connected, quiet, letting the fire's warmth push back the cold. Outside, the wind picked up. Snow began falling again, small flakes that would probably amount to nothing but might turn into another storm by morning. On the mountain, you never knew. You just prepared as best you could and survived what came. Inside, two people who'd both been alone too long were learning that survival might look different with someone beside you. Harder in some ways, caring about someone gave them power to hurt you, but easier too. Because the weight wasn't all on one set of shoulders anymore. And slowly, in a house that had forgotten what warmth felt like, something was beginning to grow. Something neither of them had words for yet, but both of them could feel taking root. It wasn't love. Too soon, too fragile, too uncertain. But it was the soil love might someday grow in. And for now, that was more than either of them had expected to find. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm that felt less like surviving and more like actually living. Evelyn woke each morning to find Gideon already up, coffee made, fire burning. They'd worked together through the daylight hours, feeding cattle, repairing fence, hauling wood, all the endless tasks that winter demanded. Evenings brought shared meals and quiet conversation, the kind where silence didn't feel like failure anymore. But the mountain hadn't finished testing them yet. It started with small things. A gate latch that froze solid overnight, trapping 3 cattle in the north pasture without water. Evelyn and Gideon spent 4 hours breaking ice and rigging a temporary fix, their hands going numb despite thick gloves. Then the barn roof started leaking where ice had worked under the shingles, requiring Gideon to climb up in wind that threatened to blow him off, while Evelyn held the ladder and tried not to think about what would happen if he fell. "This is normal?" she called up to him. "This is winter," he shouted back over the wind. "You wanted real. This is it." By the time he climbed down, his face was gray with cold and exhaustion. Inside, Evelyn made him sit by the fire while she heated water for coffee, watching his hands shake as feeling returned to his fingers. "You could have died up there," she said. "Could have. Didn't." He wrapped his hands around the cup she handed him. "Roof needed fixing. Can't wait for good weather. By then the leak would have rotted the whole structure." "The next time I'm going up with you." Gideon looked at her like she'd suggested flying. "You don't know how to work on a roof. So teach me. You said this ranch needs 2 sets of hands. Well, I've got hands. It's dangerous. Everything here is dangerous. At least if we're both up there, one of us can catch the other if something goes wrong." He studied her face, looking for fear or hesitation. Whatever he found must have satisfied him because he nodded slowly. "All right, but you do exactly what I say, when I say it. No arguing." "No arguing," Evelyn agreed. 3 days later, another section of roof needed repair. True to her word, Evelyn climbed up beside him. The wind at roof height was vicious, trying to peel her off the shingles. Below, the ground looked impossibly far away. But she focused on Gideon's instructions. "Hold this, hand me that, keep your weight distributed." And slowly, carefully, they made the repairs. When they finally climbed down, Gideon pulled her against him hard enough to hurt. "Don't ever scare me like that again," he said into her hair. "I wasn't scared. I was. Watching you up there." His arms tightened. "Just don't do it again unless we absolutely have to." But they both knew they would absolutely have to, because that's what the mountain demanded. Constant work, constant vigilance, constant risk. That night, lying in her bed listening to the house settle, Evelyn realized something had shifted. She wasn't thinking about Philadelphia anymore, wasn't comparing this life to her old one. This was simply her life now, hard and cold and demanding, but hers. She got up, crossed the hall, and knocked softly on Gideon's door. "Come in." He was sitting up in bed, a book open on his lap. In the lamplight, he looked younger somehow, less guarded. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "Don't want to sleep alone." The words hung between them, heavy with implication. They'd been married for 3 weeks now, but had maintained separate rooms, separate lives, mostly, that intersected during daylight and diverged at night. Gideon set the book aside carefully. "Evelyn, I'm not asking for—" She stopped, frustrated. "I just don't want to be alone tonight. I don't want you to be alone. Can I stay here? Just to sleep?" "Nothing else. Just not alone." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he pulled back the covers on the other side of the bed. Evelyn climbed in, the sheets cold except where his body had warmed them. They lay there in awkward silence, careful not to touch, both staring at the ceiling. "This is strange," Gideon said finally. "Very strange. But not bad strange." "No, not bad." Slowly, carefully, Gideon's hand found hers under the covers. Their fingers intertwined, and Evelyn felt something in her chest ease. She rolled onto her side, tucking herself against him. After a moment's hesitation, his arm came around her. "Is this all right?" she asked. "Yeah." His voice was rough. "This is all right." They fell asleep like that, tangled together against the cold, and when Evelyn woke the next morning, Gideon was still there, still holding her. Like even in sleep, he was afraid she might disappear. The weather turned vicious in early January. A series of storms hammered the mountain with the kind of sustained fury that made previous snow seem gentle by comparison. The temperature dropped to 20 below, then 30. The wind created drifts that buried the fence lines completely. And one morning, Evelyn woke to discover ice had formed on the inside of the windows. "We need to move the cattle," Gideon announced at breakfast. His face was drawn, worried in a way she hadn't seen before. "Storm like this, they'll freeze if they stay in the high pastures." "Move them where?" "Lower Valley. There's shelter there, more protection from wind, but it's a 6-hour ride each way, and we'll have to drive them through some rough terrain." "When do we leave?" "We don't. I do. You stay here." Evelyn set down her coffee cup with enough force to make it clatter. "We've had this argument before. This is different. This isn't fixing a roof or checking fence. This is dangerous, Evelyn. Really dangerous. One wrong move and you could—" He stopped. "I can't risk you." "But I'm supposed to let you risk yourself?" "I've done it 100 times. I know the route, know the cattle, know what to watch for. And if something happens to you, if you get hurt or lost or—" Now it was Evelyn's turn to stop. "I won't sit here not knowing if you're alive." "I can't." Gideon's jaw worked. "You're not ready for this kind of work." "Then I'll learn while we do it, same as everything else." They stared at each other across the table, both stubborn, both scared, both unwilling to back down. Finally, Gideon exhaled hard. "If you come, you follow my lead exactly. No questions, no hesitation. If I say move, you move. If I say stop, you stop. Clear?" "Clear." They rode out an hour later, bundled in every warm thing they owned. The cattle were spread across 2 pastures, dark shapes barely visible against the white. Getting them moving was brutal work. The animals didn't want to leave the meager shelter they'd found, and the cold made them sluggish and stupid. Evelyn worked one flank, while Gideon worked the other, shouting herself hoarse, trying to keep the herd together. Cider responded to her commands better now, understanding what was needed. But the cold was relentless. Evelyn's face went numb. Her fingers lost feeling despite thick gloves. Her lungs burned with each breath of frozen air. 3 hours into the drive, disaster struck. They were navigating a narrow passage between 2 rocky outcrops when one of the steers panicked. It bolted sideways, crashed into 3 others, and suddenly the entire herd was scattering in different directions. "Stay with the main group," Gideon shouted, spurring buck after a cluster of cattle heading toward a steep drop-off. Evelyn tried. She pushed Cider hard, trying to turn the cattle back toward the path, but one young heifer kept breaking away, heading straight for a snowdrift that might be 3 feet deep or might be 20, no way to tell. Evelyn made a choice. She went after the heifer. Cider plunged into the drift, snow exploding around them. For a terrifying moment, Evelyn thought they were going down, thought the snow was deeper than the horse could manage. But Cider's hooves found purchase, and they burst through to the other side. The heifer was there, eyes rolling with panic. Evelyn circled around, using Cider to block the animal's escape route, slowly pushing it back toward the main group. She heard Gideon shouting her name, but she was committed now, had to finish what she'd started. Finally, the heifer rejoined the herd. Evelyn turned Cider around and found Gideon riding toward her, his face thunderous. "What the hell were you thinking?" he demanded. "I was thinking we couldn't lose that heifer. You could have died. That drift could have swallowed you whole." "But it didn't, and we didn't lose the heifer." Gideon grabbed Cider's bridle, his face inches from Evelyn's. "Don't you ever risk yourself like that again. You hear me? Not for a cow, not for anything. You risk yourself every day. That's different. Why? Because you're expendable and I'm not? Because I can't—" His voice cracked. "I can't lose you, all right? I can't. So don't ask me to watch you throw yourself into danger." The anger drained out of Evelyn. "I'm sorry, I saw the heifer running and I didn't think. That's the problem. Up here, not thinking gets you killed." But his grip on the bridle softened. "Just be more careful. Please." "I will. I promise." They got the cattle to the lower valley by late afternoon. The animals settled into the shelter of pine trees and rock formations that broke the worst of the wind. Gideon checked each one, looking for injuries or signs of frostbite, while Evelyn kept watch. The ride home was silent. Both of them were too exhausted for conversation, too cold for anything but focused survival. By the time they reached the ranch, darkness had fallen and the temperature had dropped another 10 degrees. Inside, they stripped off frozen outer layers with clumsy, numb hands. Evelyn's entire body shook with cold that went bone deep. She'd never been this cold in her life, never understood that cold could hurt this much. Gideon built up the fire until it roared, then pulled Evelyn close to it. Warm up slow, too fast and it'll hurt worse. Hurts now. I know, but it'll pass. He disappeared, came back with blankets that he wrapped around her shoulders. Then he made coffee so strong it was almost undrinkable and pressed the cup into her hands. Slowly, painfully, warmth returned. Evelyn's fingers tingled, then burned. Her face felt like it was on fire. But gradually the shaking stopped. "You did good today," Gideon said quietly. "Scared the hell out of me, but you did good." "I didn't mean to scare you." "I know, but Evelyn—" He knelt in front of her, his hands covering hers around the cup. "You matter. To this ranch, yeah. But more than that, you matter to me, and I need you to understand what that means." "What does it mean?" "It means I can't be reckless with you the way I am with myself. It means losing you would—" He stopped, struggling. "It would break something in me that's just barely holding together as it is." Evelyn set down the cup and touched his face. "I'm not going anywhere. You keep saying that, because it keeps being true." She leaned forward, resting her forehead against his. "I'm here, Gideon. I'm staying, no matter how hard it gets." He kissed her then, and it was different from before. Less uncertain, more desperate. Like he was trying to convince himself she was real, that this was real, that he was allowed to have this. When they pulled apart, his eyes held something Evelyn hadn't seen before. Not quite vulnerability. Gideon didn't do vulnerable easily. But openness. Permission to see him as he actually was, not as he pretended to be. "I'm falling in love with you," he said. "Not romantic, not smooth, just honest. And it terrifies me." Evelyn's breath caught. "Why does it terrify you?" "Because everyone I've ever loved has left. My mother, my father, in his way. He left long before he died, checked out and stopped being present. And I promised myself I wouldn't do this again, wouldn't give anyone the power to destroy me like that." "But you're doing it anyway." "But I'm doing it anyway." He stood, pulling her up with him. "So I need you to understand, if you're going to leave, do it now. Before this goes any further, before I—" His voice roughened. "Before I can't survive it." Evelyn took his face in both hands, making him look at her. "I love you too. And I'm not leaving. Not today, not tomorrow, not when the next storm hits, or the next crisis happens, or the next time town gossip gets ugly. I'm here. For good. Do you believe me?" Gideon's eyes searched her face. "I want to." "Then try. Try to believe it, because I'm going to keep saying it until you do." They stood there while the fire crackled and the wind howled and the mountain did its best to remind them how small they were, how fragile, how temporary. But inside that house, something stronger than the mountain was taking root. That night, they didn't go to separate rooms. They climbed the stairs together, shed their clothes in comfortable silence, and crawled into bed as one unit instead of two people maintaining polite distance. Gideon held her like she was the only thing anchoring him to earth. And maybe she was. Maybe that's what love was in a place this harsh. Not flowers and poetry, but being the thing that made survival feel like more than just not dying. January crawled into February. The storms continued, relentless and mean, but inside the ranch, something was changing. Evelyn noticed it in small ways first, how Gideon smiled more often, how the tension in his shoulders eased when she was near, how he'd started talking about spring plans like he believed they'd both be there to see them through. She noticed it in herself too. The way she'd stopped measuring time in terms of endurance and started measuring it in moments of unexpected joy. The way Gideon's laugh, rare but genuine, made her chest feel full. The way coming home from hard work to a warm house felt like victory instead of just survival. But the town hadn't forgotten them, and gossip, like frost, had a way of working into cracks and causing damage. They rode into Grover's Bluff on a clear day in late February to resupply and discovered the rumors had grown teeth. "Heard Black Ridge finally snapped," someone was saying as they approached the general store. "Got that woman trapped up there. Probably threatening her if she tries to leave." Nah, I heard she's just as crazy as him. Takes a special kind of broken to stay with a man like that. Evelyn felt Gideon tense beside her, but she spoke before he could. Gentlemen, she said clearly, dismounting, if you're going to gossip about us, at least get the facts right. He's not holding me prisoner. I'm staying by choice, and the only thing broken about either of us is our patience for small-minded people who have nothing better to do than speculate about other people's lives. The men, 3 of them, ranchers who probably spent more time drinking than working, stared at her. Ma'am, we didn't mean— Yes, you did. You meant exactly what you said. But here's the truth you can spread around town. I'm happy. Happier than I've ever been. And if that bothers you, that says more about you than it does about me or my husband. She walked into the store, leaving them stammering behind her. Inside, she found Sarah Boone restocking shelves. The woman smiled when she saw Evelyn. I heard that, Sarah said. Through the window. Good for you. I'm tired of people acting like I'm some tragic victim. I made a choice. A good choice. I know. But this town, they don't know how to handle people who don't fit their expectations. Sarah glanced toward the door where Gideon was tying up the horses. He's different since you came. Lighter. People notice, even if they won't admit it. Walter emerged from the back room, and his expression brightened when he saw them. Mrs. Blackridge, Gideon, good to see you both. We need supplies, Gideon said, handing over a list. And we'll settle last month's account. While Walter gathered items, Sarah pulled Evelyn aside. There's a social next week, town gathering. Most of the ranchers and their families come. You should come too. I think you should. Let people see you and Gideon together. See that you're not some frightened prisoner. See that what you have is real. Evelyn glanced at Gideon, who was watching the exchange with wariness. I'll ask him. That night over dinner, she brought it up. Absolutely not, Gideon said immediately. Why not? Because those socials are nothing but gossip and judgment disguised as community. We don't need them. Maybe not, but maybe they need to see us. See that we're not the tragedy they want us to be. Gideon's jaw set in that stubborn line she was learning to recognize. I don't care what they think, but I do. Not because their opinion matters, but because I'm tired of being talked about, like I'm not capable of making my own decisions. I want them to see me, see us, see that we chose this. He was quiet for a long moment, war clearly happening behind his eyes. Finally, he sighed. 1 hour. We stay for 1 hour, then we leave. Deal. The social was held in the town hall, a drafty building that tried and failed to be welcoming. Lanterns hung from rafters, casting warm light over tables laden with food brought by various families. Music came from a corner where someone was playing fiddle. Evelyn and Gideon walked in together, and conversation didn't just slow, it stopped. Every eye turned to them. Gideon's hand found the small of Evelyn's back, and she could feel the tension radiating through him. But they walked in with heads high, refusing to act like they had anything to be ashamed of. Sarah appeared almost immediately, pulling Evelyn toward the food tables while Walter engaged Gideon in conversation about cattle prices. It was clearly orchestrated, but Evelyn appreciated the effort. Ignore the stares, Sarah murmured. They'll get bored eventually. But they didn't seem to be getting bored. If anything, the whispers were getting louder. Evelyn caught fragments as she moved through the crowd. Can't believe she actually stayed. Must be desperate or crazy. Give it time. She'll leave like all the others. Evelyn set down the plate she'd been filling and turned to face the room. All right, she said, her voice cutting through the murmurs. I know you're all talking about me, about us. So let's just address it directly instead of pretending we're here for polite conversation. The room went silent. Even the fiddle player stopped mid-note. Gideon appeared at her side. Evelyn, you don't have to— Yes, I do. She looked around at the gathered crowd. I know what you all think. That I'm trapped. That Gideon is cruel or broken or dangerous. That I'll leave as soon as I come to my senses. But you're wrong about all of it. Mrs. Blackridge, someone started. Let me finish. I came here knowing exactly what I was getting into. Gideon never lied to me, never promised comfort or easy living or anything except hard work and honesty. And you know what? That's more than I ever got from my first husband, who was charming and well-liked and utterly destroyed me with his lies. She found Gideon's hand, gripped it tight. This man, the one you all fear and whisper about, he's the most honest person I've ever met. And yes, life on that mountain is hard. It's cold and isolated and demanding, but it's real. And I would rather have one real day with him than a lifetime of comfortable lies. The silence stretched. Then, from the back of the room, someone started clapping. It was Sarah. Then Walter joined in, and slowly, reluctantly, others followed. Not everyone. Connell and his friends stood with arms crossed, clearly unimpressed. But enough people clapped that it felt like something shifting. Gideon pulled Evelyn close, his arm around her shoulders. That was necessary, she finished. I'm tired of hiding, tired of letting them create a story about us that isn't true. I love you, he said quietly, right there in front of everyone. I don't care who hears it. I love you. Evelyn kissed him, and if that scandalized the town further, she didn't care. They stayed for exactly 1 hour, as promised. But it was a different hour than either of them had expected. People approached them, cautiously at first, then more openly. Some offered genuine congratulations. Others asked about the ranch, about how they were managing the harsh winter, about whether they needed anything. Not everyone was friendly. Connell made a point of turning his back whenever they came near, and the two fancy Eastern women still whispered and giggled like schoolgirls. But overall, the atmosphere had shifted from hostile curiosity to grudging acceptance. On the ride home, under stars so bright they looked close enough to touch, Gideon spoke. You didn't have to defend me like that. Yes, I did. Why? I don't care what they think. Maybe not. But I care that they understand this was my choice, that I'm not some victim in a tragedy. I'm just a woman who found something real and decided to keep it. Gideon pulled Buck to a stop, turned to look at her fully. You keep surprising me. Every time I think I've figured you out, you do something unexpected. Good. I'd hate to be predictable. He reached over, pulled her close enough to kiss despite the awkward angle of two people on two different horses. Thank you for staying, for defending us, for everything. You don't have to thank me for loving you. Maybe not, but I'm going to anyway. They rode the rest of the way home in comfortable silence, and when they arrived, the house no longer looked empty or lifeless. It looked like what it was. A home. Their home. Inside, while Gideon built up the fire, Evelyn noticed something. The house felt different. She couldn't quite identify what had changed until she realized it was warmer. Not just temperature warm, but the kind of warmth that came from two people who'd stopped being strangers and started being partners. What are you smiling about? Gideon asked. Nothing. Everything. Evelyn crossed to him, wrapped her arms around him from behind. Just this. Us. He turned in her embrace, and for the first time since she'd known him, Gideon smiled. A real smile, not the ghost of one. It transformed his face, made him look younger, less burdened. What? Evelyn asked. I was just thinking. Spring's coming, and for the first time in 8 years, I'm looking forward to it, instead of just dreading the work it'll bring. Why? Because I won't be doing it alone. They stood there in their warm house while the mountain settled into another frozen night, and Evelyn realized something. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living, really, truly living. And the man she was living with, the one everyone said was too broken to love, was teaching her what love actually looked like when it was honest instead of pretty. It looked like hard work and cold mornings and calloused hands. It looked like fear faced together instead of alone. It looked like choosing each other every day, even when choosing each other was difficult. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And real, Evelyn had learned, was worth more than perfect ever could be. Spring came to the mountain the way everything came to the mountain, violently and without permission. The snow didn't melt so much as it broke apart, creating rivers where paths used to be, and turning the ranch into an obstacle course of mud and rushing water. Evelyn woke one morning in late March to the sound of something she'd almost forgotten existed, running water. Not the frozen trickle they'd been working with all winter, but actual flowing streams cutting new channels through the property. Gideon was already up, standing at the window watching the transformation with an expression that mixed relief and worry. Is this normal? Evelyn asked, joining him. Normal enough, spring runoff always causes problems. Question is, how many problems? He pulled on his boots. I need to check the creek. If it's running too high, it could take out the bridge. I'll come with you. He didn't argue anymore. That was one thing that had changed over the long winter. He'd stopped trying to protect her from the work. Stopped treating her like she might break. She'd proven herself too many times for that. The bridge was holding, but barely. Water rushed beneath it with enough force to make the whole structure vibrate. Gideon knelt, checking the support posts while Evelyn kept watch for debris that might crash into it. "We're going to need to reinforce this," he said. "Another week of runoff like this, and it'll wash out completely." "What happens if it washes out?" "We're cut off until we can rebuild it. Could be weeks, maybe months if we can't get lumber up here." They spent the next 3 days hauling rocks and timber, building up the supports while freezing water rushed past them. It was brutal work, hands constantly wet and numb, boots soaked through, backs aching from lifting stones that seemed determined to roll back into the creek. But slowly, methodically, they made the bridge stronger. On the 4th day, as they finished the last reinforcement, Evelyn sat back on her heels and looked at what they'd built together. "We did that," she said. "Yeah." Gideon stood beside her, equally filthy and exhausted. "We did." "Your father, did he do this alone?" "Every year. Alone." Something passed across Gideon's face. "I used to watch him work himself half to death every spring, refusing help even when neighbors offered. Thought he was being strong, independent, but really he was just—" He stopped. "Lonely," Evelyn finished. "Yeah, lonely." He looked at her, and in his eyes she saw something that still amazed her even after months together. Gratitude. Simple, honest gratitude that she existed, that she'd stayed, that she was here beside him building bridges instead of running from everything the mountain demanded. "I'm glad you're here." "Me too." They walked back to the house hand in hand, leaving muddy footprints across the porch that Evelyn didn't even think about cleaning. Some things mattered more than tidiness, but spring brought more than just runoff. It brought the return of the world beyond the mountain. In early April, Walter Boone rode up to the ranch with mail that had accumulated over the winter. Among the various notices and catalogs was a letter addressed to Evelyn in handwriting she recognized immediately. Her sister, Catherine, who she hadn't spoken to in over a year. Evelyn carried the letter inside, her hands shaking slightly. Gideon noticed but didn't comment, just gave her space while she sat at the table and opened it. The letter was short, direct, very much like Catherine herself. "Evelyn, I heard from mutual acquaintances that you've married again and moved west. I won't pretend I understand your decision, but I suppose you never did care much for conventional choices. That said, I wanted you to know that Father's house sold last month. Your portion of the inheritance comes to $1,847. I've arranged for the bank to transfer it to whatever institution serves your current location. I also wanted to say, though this is difficult for me, that perhaps you were right to leave. Philadelphia society is as poisonous as you always claimed. I'm only now beginning to see it clearly. Write if you wish, or don't. But know that despite everything, I hope you found whatever it was you were looking for." Catherine Evelyn read it twice, then set it down carefully. "Bad news?" Gideon asked. "No, just complicated news." She explained about the inheritance, about her sister, about the strange mix of judgment and grudging respect in Catherine's words. Gideon listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said, "That's a lot of money, nearly $2,000. You could—" He stopped. "Could what?" "Could do a lot with that. Buy passage back east, set yourself up somewhere comfortable. Start over if you wanted." Evelyn stared at him. "Is that what you think I want?" "I don't know. You came here because you didn't have other options. Now you do." Gideon Blackridge, look at me. She waited until his eyes met hers. "I didn't stay because I had no other choice. I stayed because I chose you, chose this, and an inheritance doesn't change that. But it could make things easier. I don't want easier. I want this. I want us." Evelyn stood, cross to him. "Do you understand? That money, we can use it for the ranch, new equipment, maybe expand the herd, fix everything that needs fixing. But it doesn't change anything about why I'm here." Gideon pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. "I'm sorry, sometimes I still can't believe you're real, that you stayed. And when something like this happens, my first thought is that it's your way out. There is no way out because I'm not trying to escape." She pulled back to look at him. "When are you going to believe that I'm here for good?" "I'm trying. Every day. I'm trying." "Then keep trying, because I'm not going anywhere." They decided to use part of the inheritance to make real improvements. A new roof for the barn, proper drainage systems to handle spring runoff, and something Evelyn insisted on, glass for windows that would actually keep out the cold instead of just providing a view of it. But first, they had to survive calving season. The first calf came in mid-April, born in the early morning while frost still covered the ground. Evelyn had seen birth before. Philadelphia wasn't so civilized that she'd been completely sheltered. But never like this. Never in a barn with her hands actually helping, with Gideon's steady voice guiding her through each step. "There," he said as the calf finally emerged, wet and confused and perfect. "You did good." "We did good," Evelyn corrected, watching the mother immediately begin cleaning her baby. Over the next 3 weeks, 17 more calves were born. Most went smoothly. 2 required intervention, Evelyn and Gideon working through the night to help struggling mothers. 1 calf didn't make it despite everything they tried, and Evelyn found Gideon in the barn afterward, sitting with the grieving mother, his face tight with the particular pain of someone who understood loss too well. She sat beside him without speaking, and they stayed there together while the cow lowed softly, looking for the baby that wouldn't answer. "I hate this part," Gideon said finally. "Hate that we do everything right, and sometimes it still doesn't matter." "I know. My father used to say death was just part of ranching, that you couldn't let it touch you or you'd never survive. But I think—" He paused. "I think maybe feeling it is what makes us human, what keeps us from becoming as hard as the mountain itself." Evelyn took his hand. "Your father was wrong about a lot of things." "Yeah, he was." Gideon stood, helped Evelyn up. "Come on, we got 17 healthy calves that need checking. Can't stop for the one we lost." But as they walked out of the barn, Evelyn saw him look back once at the mother cow, and she knew he was carrying that small death with him, keeping count of everything the mountain took, even as he kept working to protect what remained. In May, Walter brought news that would change everything. "There's a buyer," he announced, sitting at their kitchen table. "Big outfit out of Denver. They're looking to purchase cattle in bulk, good quality stock for breeding programs. They're offering premium prices." Gideon's expression was carefully neutral. "How premium?" Walter named a figure that made Evelyn's breath catch. With the spring calves and the existing herd, they could make enough to secure the ranch for years, maybe even expand, buy the adjacent property that had sat empty since its owner died. "What's the catch?" Gideon asked. "No catch, just timing. They want delivery by end of June. That means moving the herd down to the rail station in Cooperville. Cooperville's 4 days' drive, maybe 5 with a herd that size." "I know. But Gideon, this is the kind of opportunity that doesn't come around often. You could finally get ahead instead of just surviving season to season." After Walter left, Evelyn and Gideon sat in silence, both processing what this could mean. "We should do it," Evelyn said finally. "It's risky. 4 days on the trail with that many cattle. Weather could turn. We could lose animals. Rustlers sometimes hit the route to Cooperville. But if it works, we'd have enough money to actually build something here. Not just survive, but build." "Then let's build." Evelyn reached across the table. "We've survived everything else. We can survive this." They spent the next month preparing, organizing the herd, planning the route, arranging for 2 ranch hands from town to help with the drive. Evelyn practiced her riding until she could stay in the saddle for 10 hours straight. Gideon made lists and checked supplies and tried to account for every possible disaster. The night before they were set to leave, Evelyn found him on the porch, staring out at the herd silhouetted against the sunset. "Nervous?" she asked. Terrified. He didn't look at her. "Everything we've built, everything we have, it all depends on the next week going right." "Then we'll make it go right. You can't control weather, can't control if cattle spook or get sick, or if we run into trouble on the trail." "No, but we can control how we respond together." Evelyn stood beside him. "You've been doing this alone for so long, you've forgotten what it's like to have a partner, someone to share the weight with." Gideon finally looked at her. "I'm still learning how to let you carry it." "I know, but you're getting better at it." He pulled her close, and they stood there as darkness fell, and the mountain settled into its evening sounds. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled. Closer by, the cattle lowed softly, settling for the night. "Whatever happens," Gideon said quietly, "I want you to know, this year, having you here, it's been the best year of my life. It's been the best year of mine, too. Even with the cold and the storms and the endless work? Especially with all that. Because it was real. Because we faced it together. They left at dawn with 200 head of cattle and 2 hired hands, brothers named Jake and Thomas, who worked a small ranch south of Grover's Bluff. The first day went smoothly. The herd stayed together, the weather held, and they made good time. The second day brought rain. Not heavy enough to stop them, but enough to turn the trail muddy and make the cattle irritable. By evening, everyone was soaked and exhausted. "This is miserable," Jake said, huddling by their campfire. "This is ranching," Gideon replied, but without his usual edge. Months of living with Evelyn had softened some of his harder edges, made him more patient with complaints. On the third day, they lost 6 cattle. It happened fast. A snake spooked one steer, which crashed into others, and suddenly a dozen animals were scattering into the brush. They recovered most of them, but 6 vanished completely into rough terrain too dangerous to follow. Gideon stood at the edge of the ravine they disappeared into, his face unreadable. "We keep moving," he said finally. "Can't risk the rest of the herd chasing after 6. That night he was quiet. More than usual. Evelyn found him checking the herd long after everyone else had gone to sleep. "You're thinking about the 6 we lost," she said. "Thinking about all the ways this could still go wrong. How we're so close, but nothing's guaranteed until we actually deliver and get paid. You're also thinking about your father, about how he'd say losing those cattle was your fault." Gideon's shoulders tensed. "Maybe it was. Maybe if I'd been more careful." "Stop." Evelyn turned him to face her. "You did everything right. Sometimes things go wrong anyway. That doesn't make it your fault." My father would have said, "Your father was wrong about most things, including how to measure success." She put her hands on his chest, feeling his heartbeat under her palms. "We've still got nearly 200 head. We're on schedule. We're together. That's what matters. I just want this to work. Want to prove that everything we've been through, that it means something. It already means something. Whether this sale happens or not, what we've built together means something." Gideon kissed her forehead. "How did I get so lucky?" "You didn't get lucky. You wrote honest letters and I answered them. That's not luck. That's just 2 people finding each other." On the 4th day, they spotted Cooperville in the distance. The herd was tired but intact. The weather had held. They'd made it. The buyer met them at the rail yard, a sharp-dressed man named Morrison, who examined the cattle with an expert eye. Evelyn held her breath while he walked among them, checking teeth, studying conformation, occasionally making notes in a small book. Finally, he turned to Gideon. "Quality's good. Better than expected, actually. I'll take the whole lot at the price we discussed." The transaction took less than an hour. Papers signed, money exchanged, cattle loaded onto rail cars. And just like that, everything changed. Gideon stood holding a bank draft that represented more money than he'd seen in his entire life, looking slightly shell-shocked. "We did it," Evelyn said. "We did it," he repeated, like he couldn't quite believe it. They stayed in Cooperville that night, their first night in a hotel since Evelyn had arrived in the territory. The room was small but clean, with a real bed and glass in the windows, and the luxury of not being responsible for anything until morning. Gideon sat on the bed, still holding the bank draft. "What are you thinking?" Evelyn asked. "I'm thinking about my father, about how he worked this ranch for 30 years and never got ahead, never had a season like this. And I'm wondering what? If maybe he could have. If he'd let people help instead of pushing everyone away." Gideon set down the draft carefully. "I'm thinking about all the years I wasted doing the same thing, convinced I had to survive alone, or I wasn't really surviving at all." Evelyn sat beside him. "But you're not doing that anymore." "No." "Because you wouldn't let me." He took her hand. "You know what this money means. It means we can fix everything that needs fixing. Means we can hire help during hard seasons. Means we can actually build a life instead of just scraping by." "It means we have choices," Evelyn said. "That's what it really means. We're not trapped anymore." "Were you trapped before?" "No. But I think you were. Trapped by the idea that suffering alone was the only way to prove you could survive." She touched his face. "But survival isn't the goal, Gideon. Living is." He kissed her then, and it tasted like relief, like the release of tension he'd been carrying so long it had become part of his skeleton. They rode back to the ranch with Jake and Thomas, taking their time now that the pressure was off. The mountain looked different somehow, less harsh, or maybe they'd just learned how to see its beauty alongside its brutality. When the ranch came into view, Evelyn felt something she'd never expected to feel about a place that had tested her so thoroughly. She felt like she was coming home. Over the next months, they used the money wisely. New roof on the barn, proper fencing, a well dug closer to the house so Evelyn didn't have to haul water from the creek, glass windows that actually kept out the cold, and, at Evelyn's insistence, paint. Real paint, to cover the weathered gray wood and make the house look less like a fortress and more like a home. "What color?" Gideon asked, standing in the general store staring at paint samples. "White," Evelyn said immediately. "Clean and bright, so it stands out against all that wilderness. White shows dirt, then we'll clean it. I'm tired of everything being gray." They painted the house together over 3 long weekends, getting more paint on themselves than the walls, but laughing through it. And when they finished, the ranch looked transformed. No longer a place of survival and isolation. Now it looked like somewhere people actually lived. Word spread through Grover's Bluff about the successful cattle sale, about the improvements to the Black Ridge Ranch, about how Evelyn had not only stayed but seemed to be thriving. The gossip changed, not all of it. Connell and his friends still muttered about unnatural arrangements and broken men. But most of the town began to accept what they were seeing, a marriage that worked not despite its hardness, but because both people had chosen honesty over comfort. In August, Sarah Boone rode up to the ranch with her husband. They brought news that the property adjacent to the Black Ridge Ranch was officially for sale. "Owner's nephew wants to liquidate," Walter explained, "asking a fair price. If you're interested, we're interested," Evelyn and Gideon said simultaneously. They bought it. Used part of the cattle sale money and part of Evelyn's inheritance to purchase 300 additional acres, doubling the size of their operation. "We'll need help," Gideon said, looking at maps of their newly expanded property. "Can't work this much land with just 2 people." "Then we'll hire help. Real help, not just seasonal hands." They brought on Jake and Thomas permanently, building them a small cabin on the far side of the property. And suddenly the ranch wasn't just Gideon and Evelyn anymore. It was a real operation, a business, something that could last beyond just 1 generation. But the real transformation came that winter. The first storm of the season hit in November, and Evelyn braced herself for the isolation, the cold, the relentless work. But it was different this time. They had help with the cattle, had supplies stockpiled properly, had systems in place that didn't require constant crisis management, and more than that, they had each other in a way they hadn't the previous winter. No more uncertainty. No more wondering if she'd stay or if he'd push her away. They'd built something strong enough to weather anything. One night, snowed in but comfortable, Evelyn found Gideon in the room that had once been his father's study. He'd been avoiding it all year, leaving it closed and untouched. But now he was sorting through papers, decades of records and letters, and accumulated history. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Cleaning out the past." He held up a letter written in faded ink. "These are from my mother. After she left. She wrote him for years trying to explain, trying to apologize. He kept every letter, but never answered a single one." Evelyn sat beside him, looking at the stack of unopened envelopes. Why didn't he respond? Pride, probably. Or hurt. Maybe both. Gideon set the letters down carefully. She didn't leave because she stopped loving him. She left because the isolation was killing her and he couldn't see it. Wouldn't compromise or find a way to make it work. "Are you going to read them?" "I don't know. Part of me wants to. Part of me thinks it doesn't matter anymore. She's dead. He's dead. It's all in the past." "But it's not," Evelyn said gently. "The past is why you expected me to leave. Why you pushed away 9 other women before me. Your parents' story became your story until you decided to write a different ending." Gideon looked at her, something vulnerable in his expression. "What if I hadn't written those letters? What if you hadn't answered?" "But I did. We both did. That's what matters." He pulled her close. "I want to be different than him, than both of them. I don't want our story to end with regret and unopened letters." "Then it won't. We get to choose how our story goes." "I choose you," Gideon said. "Every day I choose you. I choose us. I choose us too." Spring came again as it always did. The 3rd spring since Evelyn had stepped off that stagecoach and refused to leave. The ranch was thriving now. The expanded herd was healthy. The new property was being developed. Jake and Thomas had proven themselves reliable and hardworking. Everything they'd built together was solid and real and lasting. But more than that, they were happy. Not the desperate, clinging happiness of people trying to convince themselves they'd made the right choice. The quiet, steady happiness of two people who fit together despite, or maybe because of, all their sharp edges. One morning in May, Evelyn woke to find Gideon gone from bed but coffee made and a note on the table. Meet me at Eagle Point. Sunrise. Trust me. G. She rode cider up the mountain as the sun began painting the eastern sky. When she reached Eagle Point, the rocky outcrop Gideon had warned her about that first ride together, she found him waiting. "What's this about?" she asked, dismounting. "Look." He pointed to the valley below. From this height, she could see the entire ranch spread out like a map. The White House bright against green spring grass, the barn and outbuildings, the fences marking pastures where cattle grazed, the creek running silver through it all, and beyond, the mountains rising into morning mist. "Do you remember what you said that first day?" Gideon asked. "When I tried to convince you to leave?" "I said a lot of things. You said you understood what you were agreeing to, that you'd read my letters and knew what life here would be like." He took her hand. "Were you right? Did you know?" Evelyn looked at the ranch below, thinking about everything the past year had held, the brutal cold and the backbreaking work, the town gossip and the endless challenges, but also the quiet mornings and the shared victories, the feeling of building something real with someone who saw her clearly and loved her anyway. "No," she said honestly, "I had no idea what I was agreeing to. It's been harder than I imagined in some ways, but better in others, better in the ways that actually matter." "Do you regret it? Any of it?" "Not for a second." Gideon pulled something from his pocket, a small carved wooden box, rough but carefully made. "I'm not good with words," he said, "not like letter writing good anyway, but I wanted to give you something to mark," he struggled, "to mark what you did. Coming here, staying, choosing this even when it would have been easier to choose something else." Evelyn opened the box. Inside was a ring, simple silver, with a small stone that caught the early light. "It's not fancy," Gideon said quickly, "not like what city jewelers would make, but I wanted you to have something, a real wedding ring, not just words spoken and paper signed." "Gideon," Evelyn's throat was tight. "It's perfect." He took the ring, slid it onto her finger. It fit perfectly, like he'd measured somehow without her knowing. "I love you," he said, "not because you saved me or fixed me or any of that romantic nonsense. I love you because you're stubborn and strong, and you see things clearly even when the truth isn't pretty. I love you because you chose this life knowing it would be hard, and you kept choosing it even when it got harder than either of us expected. I love you too, for all the same reasons." Evelyn looked at the ring, then at the man who'd given it to her. "We did it, didn't we? We actually made this work. We're making it work, still making it work. That's the thing about life up here. It's never finished, never settled, always another challenge, another storm, another thing that needs fixing." "Good," Evelyn said. "I'd be bored with easy." They stood there as the sun cleared the mountains and light flooded the valley, turning everything golden. Below, the ranch, their ranch, waited for another day of work and challenge and hard-won progress. It wasn't the life Evelyn had imagined for herself. Wasn't the comfort or security or ease she'd been raised to want. But it was real. It was hers. It was theirs. And standing on that mountain with the man who'd been honest enough to warn her away and brave enough to let her stay, Evelyn understood something fundamental about happiness. It wasn't about finding the perfect circumstances or the easiest path. It was about choosing something real and then doing the work to make it last. The mountain hadn't broken them, hadn't driven them apart, hadn't taken more than they could afford to give. Instead, it had shown them what they were made of, had tested them and found them strong enough, not because they were perfect, but because they were honest, because they'd faced hard things together instead of running from them separately. "Ready to go back?" Gideon asked. "Always." Evelyn took his hand. "But Gideon, next time you want to do something romantic, maybe don't make me ride up a mountain before sunrise." He laughed, a real laugh, full and genuine and free. "No promises. You married a mountain rancher. Romance comes with altitude." "Fair enough." They rode back down together as the valley came alive with morning. And in the years that followed, through more storms and more challenges, through seasons of plenty and seasons of hardship, through all the ordinary, extraordinary moments that made up a life, they kept choosing each other. Not because it was easy, not because it was perfect, but because it was real. And in the end, real was all they'd ever needed. The woman who refused to leave had found something worth staying for, and the man who'd convinced himself he was meant to be alone had learned that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let someone close enough to prove you wrong. Together, they built a life on that mountain, not despite its hardness, but using that hardness to forge something stronger than either of them could have created alone. And when people in Grover's Bluff told the story in years to come, and they did tell it, passing it down through generations, they didn't talk about the mountain rancher who drove women away. They talked about the two people who looked at a hard life and chose it anyway, who proved that sometimes the most unlikely matches make the strongest bonds. But Evelyn and Gideon didn't care much about what people said. They were too busy living the story to worry about how it was being told. And every morning when Evelyn woke in the house that had once felt so empty, wrapped in the arms of a man who'd once believed he was too broken to love, she knew she'd made the right choice. Not the easy choice, not the safe choice, but the true choice. And in the end, that made all the difference.